All right, hello and welcome back to the Game Dev Show. Here I'm here today with Jason Story, Andrew, Yorai, and Corvallis, and we've got a lot to talk about. So I think we should probably dive right into it. We're gonna, let's just do a real quick overview of some of the. We lost the Jason for a second. It's flipping it out of a couple of the topics. So we're gonna talk a little bit about AI and some of the stuff that's going on with GMTK and Hugging Face. I thought was pretty funny, and Corvallis's game jam that's going on too. And I want to talk a little bit about performance optimization, some of the stuff that I've seen on the Primogen channel, specifically about Martin Fowler and the Clean Code book. And we're going to dive into a couple other cool things like the Dev Blitz that just went on for the graphic side, the new LTS that's about to drop, and maybe a couple performance tips. And I'm a little bit curious if anybody else was watching the build conference too, if anybody saw anything really awesome that we should make sure to take a look at. Oh, and Yora, I mentioned, there is a new video game out with a little green dude, the Zelda. I actually wanted to grab that. I haven't had a chance to play it. So have you guys tried that out? I guess, why don't we start there? Have you guys played the new Zelda game?
I finished it, so.
Okay.
How long has it been out?
More than a week now, so.
Wow.
Those are amateur numbers.
Played a lot, or it's very easy to finish.
Or he's really good.
Or
Yeah.
from a design perspective,
Your eyes a pro.
He named his characters and was on
This game is very accommodating to not giving a lot of respect to the mechanics. Let's just say that. Duct tape is overpowered.
Okay.
So
was it a lot of fun?
I will say holistically, it's kind of why I have an issue with sandbox games, because like they incentivize a style of have your own fun, but it also means you don't play the game that was made, which is a problem I have.
Yeah, so I guess we should probably talk about it properly from the introduction. So Zelda Tears of the Kingdom came out, and as a sequel to Breath of the Wild. It's an open world, and it's an even bigger open world. And it has a lot of really interesting mechanics. So I played it, and then I got the gist of the mechanics, and then I started trying to break it. And there was way more fun in trying to break it than trying to play it. Let's just say that. I discovered a lot of stuff, and it's really interesting as a programmer to try and figure out how they do a lot of their stuff. But it's also a great masterclass in level design and seeing all the small details, seeing how to guide a player in a certain way. I think there's a lot that could be talked about there. The changed powers was amazing from a mechanical thinking point, changing compared to Breath of the Wild. Did you get to play it at all, or am I talking blind?
I haven't at all. I've had zero chance to play games all week.
Same. I haven't. I just came off of finals grind.
I got as far as I started playing it. I didn't have a lot of time, so I started it, and I was like, I'll get to the first checkpointy section, and then I'll turn it off and get back to work, and I'll come back to it later. And so after what felt like 30 minutes of take 4 steps, cutscene, take 5 steps, cutscene, take 3 steps, dialogue, I was just like, by the time I finally got to the first bit where you can actually walk, I'm like, yeah, I'm done now. And so I haven't gotten back to it since.
Pavel, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I haven't had time to play it too. Last 2 weeks we are still preparing to release the lava and working on some other stuff. I had about 300 projects to analyze and give some grades, so it was heavy week.
I love the Sauron impression there. Release the lava.
Well, if it makes you feel better, that's Fire Temple right there.
You can borrow some.
Yeah.
So getting back on the Zelda topic, so the powers changed quite a lot. In Zelda Breath of the Wild, you had the magnet, you had the stasis, and you had the 2 bomb powers. And in Tears of the Kingdom, they actually changed the entire thing. So literally all of the powers save magnet have been drastically modified. Magnet has only been given a slight more capacity. Previously, you could only grab metallic objects, but now you can also grab wooden objects and even things like as they fly, and living creatures such as the corks. So you can grab them around and move them. And they added the duct tape power or combine, which does combine both the items and things in the world, including the corks. To start
Including your shield, which I think leads to a lot of the more fun, interesting combinations.
So you can basically combine almost any item in the game with almost any item in the game, and depending on what you combine, you get different results. And the results don't always end up as you expect, but it's usually in the player's favor. And there's a lot of really fun things. There was like this meme where in the old videos about Zelda, he would throw a bomb and then use the shield to like jump on it. So you can actually get a bomb fruit and you can combine it to your shield. And then if you do a shield jump, which has you landing on the shield to slide, and the bomb is already combined to it, you'll actually jump really high. And then you can combine a rocket to your shield and you can go up with the rocket. And there's
You
a
can
lot
make
of
your own super jump.
yeah, pretty much. And there's also a lot of other really fun things. So now stasis has been changed into a rewind power. You lose the ability to put enemies in place, like having them stop and then hitting them a bunch for free. But you get the ability to start moving objects backwards. So if an enemy shoots a boulder at you, you can actually enable rewind and make the boulder go back to the enemy. So that's like one really nice use. But it gets even wonkier because you can rewind falling objects from really high up, and then you go up with them. Or you can have something that's fallen be combined to something you can stand on, and then rewind up. So one of the fun combinations there is that since you can combine anything, you can combine a bunch of wood to your arrow, shoot it way up, it falls down, you combine a platform to that wood, you rewind the wood with the platform now as you stand on the platform, and you go up to the sky.
Oh,
Yeah, so from a point of perspective of trying to fight things and using the powers actively, I'm kind of sad because a lot of the powers of combination somewhat amount to just stat boosts, but rewind has a lot of potential for it for like funny combat things. So yeah.
so that's interesting. There's a question in here from Dustin that I was kind of wondering the same a little bit about with this rewind stuff and all of the shit going on in there about the physics of the game. And they're talking a little bit about the performance, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how they might have gone about doing some of these things. Because they do have like a massive world and they've got to be able to like for example, that rewind time and any just random guesses on how they might be accomplishing that just to rewind the physics of some one object or set of objects.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of experiments with it. As I said, I was trying to break it in more ways than one. The text of the physics is that I'm actually really pleased. A lot of the hitboxes feel accurate when you're actually interacting with it. Like I could go up on a thin surface and it would actually have enough standing area for Link to actually tread on carefully. If you don't have it, then Link would slide down like slightly. So if you're trying to go like on a single rail for a cart that has like no flooring, you could actually make a few steps forward, but you likely slide away. A lot of the stuff when you're trying to actually place gentle objects on surfaces, those run really well because they kind of rig it in your favor. So if you put a cart and like your angle is slightly off, it would actually like magnetize it so it's in the right angle. But if you try to put something that's not meant to be on a rail, you'll see that it's going really, really jank. So if you try to put a plank on a rail, it will almost never sit still. It will always like try to slide one way or the other, even though the surface looks entirely linear. There are other things there. For example, if you try to rewind, which for those who have never implemented a rewind system and just want to explain the very basic concept, games run on frames, and when you have a frame, you can take a snapshot of the position and the rotation of an object at the given point in time in the frame. You may also want to gather other things such as velocity or health of the object if you have like more complex mechanics. Zelda does not. And as you take those snapshots, you can then decide to rewind how the snapshots have been played. So if you're on frame 3 and you have the snapshots for frame 2 and frame 1, you can decide that from now, from frame 3, I'm rewinding, and frame 4 will actually paste frame 2's values, and frame 5 will paste frame 1's values. And now the object is going back. Naturally, this only goes as far as you've taken snapshots. So if you don't have any more, the object freezes. Now, in Tears of the Kingdom, when you rewind, you actually have a counter of time you can rewind. That's not just for game mechanics, that's also for implementation details, because they can't have infinite records of everything, because that keeps taking on memory and also performance. Other details you can see is that objects far away from you will not have much history. If you move really, really fast in a certain direction and then you try to rewind something that should have like recently fallen, etc., that would not have a lot of history. The rewind would like only go a bit up. This is also why when you have rocks that fall from the floating islands, they'll only go like halfway up into the sky and then they'll stop, because the history for them has not been recorded past that point.
It is worth noting as well for people who don't know that, yes, it does capture the history points, but the reason you don't see it as like stepped chunks is you often interpolate between those points. So it'll still look like it's smoothly rewinding, but if you watch carefully, even a relatively accurately captured one is still interpolating and not exactly what happened the first time around.
Mhm.
Yeah. Other things that are important to note here is that they're not capturing velocity of the objects. In Tears of the Kingdom, if you rewind and you stop rewinding, the object just loses velocity entirely. This is actually really important because also it saves them on the amount of things that they have to record, but more importantly, it changes how the game mechanic plays. So you can't have an arrow that you shot, rewind, hold it in place, and then let it loose and then it will go fast. It can only go backwards on the snapshots it had. It does not have the velocity. So if you untap the rewind, it will just fall down. Now, in terms of trying to break Tears of the Kingdom, this is actually fantastic because there are challenges where you have to like glide into a certain spot in water, like throwing a dart into a certain place. And if you're flying over it, you can just decide to rewind and immediately unrewind and you fall in place because you don't have velocity anymore. It also helps with puzzles. Now, they always record a physical object as far as I can tell, which is very important because, as I mentioned, you have Ultra Hand now, the power of telekinesis in a sense, where you can move objects up and then down. And a lot of the puzzles in Tears of the Kingdom have you trying to make like smart contraptions to help get you up. But what you can do instead is literally just take Ultra Hand, lift an object up, let it fall down, stand on it, enable rewind, and now you're up while you are using Ultra Hand. You cannot Ultra Hand things that you stand over, but you can rewind things that you stand over. So,
yeah, there's a similar one that speedrunners are using that instead of doing anything fancy with like launching or throwing yourself, there's literal wings. You can just drop them and it'll start floating. So just do whatever it takes to get yourself into the sky, drop these wings out of your backpack and just stand on it. There you go. You've now got like an infinite flying machine.
yeah, when you have problems trying to get that off the floor too, like if you are standing on the floor and you're trying to get the bird flying, what you can do is you can lift it up with Ultra Hand, let it fall down, stand on it, rewind it upwards, and now it's in the sky and it has some space to fall and like move forward. Other than that, when you combine objects, they become new objects, so you cannot rewind. The object that gets combined loses its history. So only the object that was the original one gets to keep it. I hope I'm not getting confused. There was some jank there.
That makes sense. Otherwise, if you combined them and rewound them, they would have to like come apart, right?
Yeah.
Choose which history.
Yeah. There are also objects that have a lot of weird interactions with rewind. I assume it was for optimization reasons or like edge cases that they haven't considered. But if an object passes by a flaming thing while it's being rewounded, there would be some weird information about the fire status. I saw an exploit recently where there are Octoroks that can suck up the object, vacuum the objects that you have into their mouth and then shoot it back at you. And when they do that, they upgrade your item. But if you rewind at the exact point that it should go into their mouth so that they can spit it at you, the object that's getting rewounded goes back, but they also shoot it at you, duplicating the item.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, there's like a lot of really small things that I can't imagine the amount of QA that must have gone to get the game as stable as it is. Because if you're not trying to break it, you will almost never find anything to break. But when you're trying to break it, it goes really, really far. As for performance, by the way, I want to say it's freaking amazing. The frame rates I can live with being low. The game is relatively slow enough that you don't really need the high frame rate. It doesn't make you feel nauseous at all. But the sense that I can like fly up and glide to wherever I want and I don't have like any stop in place issues is fantastic. You can be in the sky, fall from falling islands, etc. The only time that I ever had something stop and have me wait without a loading screen was when I was force descending as fast as I can from a floating island really high up into a very dense place below. The game would literally just stop you in the air in your animation just as it loads the world, and then it continues. But otherwise, it's like really, really nice.
That kind of ties into the question that Dustin asked too about the world streaming in the game, and saying that it seems like it's big with no loading screens. Although it sounds like you found one way to kind of force a loading pause at least. Do you guys have thoughts on how they went about that? Or Paolo, you might have some thoughts on that too. World streaming is kind of your forte. So I don't know if you guys have thoughts on how they did such a big world and made it all open without. I mean, there are a couple different, I think, routes to go, but I don't know. You guys have thoughts on what they might have used?
So I'd like to point out the general strategies first, if I can, Powell, just so everybody has a sense. So you can't render a perfect world with perfect detail, the entire world, easily on a small machine because you don't have all the information for it. Traditionally speaking, if something is very far away from you, you don't need to see all the details. If I am taking a toothbrush, you don't need to see every small piece of like, what would you call the things you brush your
The bristles?
Yeah, you don't have to see every single bristle from 5 kilometers away because you won't. There's not enough pixels on the screen to convey that information to you. Therefore, as things get farther away from you, we can reduce the amount of detail that is loaded on the machine to display them. This is what we call levels of detail. The closer things are, the higher levels of detail we want for an object. At a certain point, it's far enough that we can't discern literally anything except how it generally looks. So instead of having a model with all the details like the actual toothbrush geometry, we can replace it with an imposter image of this is a toothbrush. This is what games use as skybox map, sky maps. So there, to display like details far away from you, cliffs, etc. So you basically make a very small texture that like contains the details of what would roughly be there, and then you render that. And if you do it from a lot of angles, it can still be a relatively small texture, but you change the angle and maybe even interpolate it as you go around the object. This saves a lot of like video resources for the device to render the object that you need, especially if you have a lot of it, because the same texture can be used like in multiple places, and each place is like 2 triangles or 1 quad displaying the information. So those are levels of details in general. You can have an object, with less details, and eventually an imposter. Now, games that want to have a big world and let you see very far away from it, a lot of it from very far away, generally have a lot of level of details for every single area in the game. And then they bake it offline. By the way, this is a very long process, like to get all the details there. And then as you get closer, they bring in more levels of information. If you play Genshin Impact, it uses the exact same strategy. If you look at trees very far away, as you get close, you can see like details popping in. Grass is also a very big topic on this. When you look at grass, sometimes it will go shorter as it's farther away from you and eventually disappear. The gradient on the floor is what actually drives the look that it's a grassy plain, but the grass is really only near you. You can also see a lot of details like in games where you can cut grass. If you go far away and come back, the grass is uncut again because they spawn new grass for you. So yeah, that's the general gist of it. Now, as far as doing it on a higher level of quality, offering it all, I don't have any idea. Powell, got anything?
Yeah, so topic is very hard to talk in a few minutes, but basics are what Yorai said, but that's for medium-sized games. For big open games, you have to go even deeper. Yeah. So you have to check, have the entire world split into chunks. Mostly it's done by tile sizes or something similar. Yeah. Then if you have it split into tile sizes, you check that each tile is as small as possible. That's one thing. A second thing is that each object in this tile has several levels of details, which are also very small. And the best thing is, for example, for textures, you should slim textures except the meshes. So, for example, there is a tool called for Unity. I will talk about Unity, and it has it built in. We have texture slimming. Yeah, Unity has some kind of mipmaps slimming right now, but it's not as robust as something like that Amplify done. It just takes you that you have a texture from that can be size of 2 gigabytes, for example, 16 by 60K, that you use for some kind of buildings, and it streams only this level of quality of this texture to the memory that you need at this point. Yeah, so you can have the quality of texture the same that goes for meshes and LODs, the same goes for the slimming textures. It's one of the things that you have to look. Then you have to look about meshes, because meshes also has to be slimmed to the GPU. Next thing is that each object on the scene can hit at two places. One is CPU, second is GPU. If you don't need it for computations, you should only store it on GPU and only use it and instance it around the entire level. Yeah. So, and combining these all things together will give you some kind of slimming of the world. Yeah. So it's this is the basics. If you want to go further into detail, that is the link that I gave. I think this is this one. Yeah, it's amazing talk by the team that created the Spider-Man game. The new was not the second version, but first version. They go into a detail, very low, hard-coded detail, how to do, how they did it. Yeah, so they check each smallest piece of data and make it even smaller with their own possibilities. So I would suggest checking this one. Yeah, it's there.
Yeah.
And it's amazing talk that goes into details what I talked to you about.
I see. I linked it in chat too, but I also really quickly wanted to mention, like, you also built a tool that does this, right?
Yeah,
like when people like you definitely know this stuff better than anybody here.
Yeah, we built a tool that splits the scenes and slims them. Yeah, the tool as it's asset store tool. It's mostly using what you can do in Unity with Unity terrains. If you want to go deeper, then you have to have knowledge how to use this tool. Yeah, because this is a tool for, I would say, medium to seniors to use. That's I always I will have to say it.
There is one more thing I wanted to bring up from earlier when you explained everything. Mipmaps are a very interesting thing to tackle. It took me a while to understand like what is the actual purpose of them, because like getting more textures, why would you need that? So for those not aware of what mipmaps are, which is a very fun name to say very quickly, when you have a texture, it may be a big texture. It may take a lot of memory to load the texture in. If you have a texture that is like half a gigabyte, you don't want for the player to load like half a gigabyte worth of pixels just to render a rock. And with textures getting larger and larger, so you can have more details as you get close, obviously that's going to take more time, more resources, and it also limits how many textures you can have loaded in memory on the device at the same time, because like, you know, a graphics device only has so much memory it can use. So what we do instead is we make smaller versions of the textures that have less detail, but in turn we can load them faster. This is what a mipmap is. You take a texture and you cut the size by 2, for example, and then you take that cut by size 2 and cut it again. Now you have a quarter size texture, and again and again. Eventually, if you try to put it all together, it's never going to take more than twice the memory of the entire texture. But as you load a level, you can load the smallest texture first, and then the bigger ones as you get closer or as you have more time to load things. You want the level to load quickly, after all. Players don't want to wait like 5 minutes for a level to load. you can take 10 seconds to load the very small textures first, and then as the player gets closer, you load in more details. This is also why games that load very quickly sometimes will have like really bad textures on the first few seconds, and then the details like come in. Borderlands was notorious for it. And on top of that, there is also a performance concern in real time, which is when you grab a pixel to render it on any shader, your graphics device is smart, and it's saying you're probably going to want the pixels near it too. So it also grabs all the pixels nearby, so it doesn't have to do a lot of backs and forths to check what's the texture got and give it to you in your shader. Now, this is great until the object is far away from you. Remember how I explained that if you have a toothbrush really far away, you're not going to see enough pixels to see it. But the 2 pixels that you will see might be on the 2 ends of the toothbrush, like one on the bristles and one on the stick. But because they are in different faraway points in the texture, the pixel grabbing won't get both of them. So as the texture gets smaller, it's easier for it to grab more of it in relative portions, which is making the entire process faster to render objects. So mipmaps are really important. Do not disable them just because they make something look slightly less pretty on your editor.
And one advice for mipmaps: if you're rendering opaque object, check that the texture is always only RGB. Yeah, it shouldn't be RGBA if you're not using opaque texture, because alpha channel is used to store mipmaps if it's opaque object. If you use the texture as RGBA, A channel is empty and you're getting additional data size that you don't need to.
Very good advice. Yorai, can you want to tell everybody how to enable or disable mipmaps too, in case they have no idea?
Yeah, sure. So in Unity, you have that when you look at the texture that you dragged into the project or brought in, there are texture import settings. Every asset has asset import settings that happen thanks to the asset importer in Unity. Cutting all the technical terms aside, there's literally a drop-down for if you want to use mipmaps and how to use it. There's also settings for compression, which would matter later. Those generally say like how you can actually load the texture and store it. Obviously, if you decide to compress a texture, it's going to take less space, but it's going to take longer times to load because you have to decompress the texture as you load it. So choosing a decompression algorithm also matters. But for mipmaps, you literally just enable a checkbox and drop down.
And it's just enabled by default, right? On normal textures?
Recall, yeah. Yeah, there are times that you don't want a texture to be mipmap, especially if it has like small details or if it's a detailed texture of something important like VFX. That you don't want it blending things, because a mipmap, again, it's generated for you. And as it gets smaller, it probably wants to do blending in a certain way. We talked before about how we have different ways of making a texture smaller and retaining details, like nearest neighbor or bilinear or trilinear. So that is where you care about these details.
So, Story, I can't see you, but I assume I can hear you, right?
I'm still here. See if I can get my camera to not overheat.
There was. You got to get. Do you have one of the external batteries, by the way? The plug-in one.
No, I should. I've just been using the USB-C. Which
I would switch that. That's the only way I got mine to stop. Yeah, it stopped overheating once I put that in because like the charging. I don't know, and then I stopped having to worry about charging it too. It's really nice. I'd definitely grab one. But there was a question in chat that you were talking about that was loosely LOD related on the AI behaviors, and they're wondering if there were equivalents to this graphical LOD stuff on the AI side. So thinking like NPC logic, what's going on, and it could even be in Zelda or other games. I don't know if you had you had a little discussion there, but I thought it'd be a fun thing to mention and talk about.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that I mean, as Paul kind of pointed out, the answer is almost always the same. It doesn't matter if we're talking rendering or anything else. It's make things smaller, make this thing smaller and more compact, and do the more math on less things more often. That's usually the general takeaway. And so it doesn't matter if it's rendering stuff, creating shapes, or whatever. If you're creating shapes, cut out the middle pieces, less math. If you're doing something with faces, cut out the faces you can't see, less math. And so the short answer is, when it comes to AI, it's no different. AI calculations boil down to how much complexity. So a good example of this is if you've got two characters fighting with swords, and it's really detailed, and they're clanging swords off each other, and you're doing all the collisions and math, and they're like parrying each other and watching each other's movements. That's all great, and then health goes up and down. But if you turn your back, you can kind of just fake it. You can just say, roll dice, character 1 hits character 2, number goes down. You turn around and it goes back to all the fancy math, but you turn away and it's just rolling dice behind you. It doesn't need to render all of the complex stuff that you're not seeing anymore, right? So a lot of that is what happens. Even in the Spider-Man talk as well that Paul mentioned, there's specifically, they talk about that, where there's streets, cars, and the way things loop and the way characters walk. They walk sensibly when you're watching them, but when you're not watching them, then, you know, you don't, they can just be vectors that like will roughly retain the same position. So if you watch them walk one way and then you wait at the other end when they come out the other side, they'll come out roughly at the right time, but nothing's rendering anymore. There's like, if you could see through the wall, there wouldn't be anything there. There is just now the concept of a vector moving in space. So yeah, this goes for all AI. If you have more complex AI systems, like in Breath of the Wild, or any game with like compounding AI with different characters. Horizon's well known for this. You can kind of move up the chain from FSMs to task management systems to hierarchical task management systems to like nested hierarchical task management systems, and you basically end up with running complicated algorithms based on the world, because it's not just AI. It's like, how much things in the environment should I use to make this decision? But depending on how clever you are, you can take that output and just feed it down the chain. A good example of this would be something like A-star pathfinding. I could do A-star pathfinding where every unit walks the whole map and decides the right path. Or I can have one unit do that and then draw a vector flow field that moves in the right direction towards the target. And every subsequent enemy behind me can just follow the vectors. They don't need to actually do the calculations the first guy did. And so what a lot of these smarter AI systems will do is they have a couple of spearheaded AI characters, usually 5, 6, sometimes 8, in front of you, who do all the really clever calculations based on what you're doing and whatever, and they trickle that back down the line. And so by the time you get to the far ones, they're just doing a distance check plus, you know, does player have this weapon equipped or something. And so you can, it still looks very intelligent, because as time moves on, you don't really notice the transition. So it's kind of like the, as well, even as Uri was saying with the pixel distance. Like if an enemy up close is like literally, you can see their pupils watching your sword move, and the guy at the back is standing on a hill watching you move. Like, you're not seeing the fidelity of the eyeballs from a distance. Conceptually, it doesn't really matter as long as the information of your tracked position is like propagated to the previous characters.
This reminds me a lot of actually, go ahead, Uri. I wouldn't say something, but it's going to be long, so go ahead.
I just wanted to bring up that there are a lot of things that happen off screen that like cut down the amount of work that a game has to do. It's actually very notorious that in some games it's even a game design thing. You don't want enemies that are off screen to attack the player, because the player would like scream and like, I couldn't see that information. This game sucks. Why didn't they show me? So a lot of these games would like have an enemy literally not attack you if they're off the screen area, and they'll try to walk into the screen area first. God of War is a very good example for it. They had a GDC talk where they specifically explained how they pick certain spots in front of the player, and if an enemy is not there, they're not going to attack the player. The enemy first goes into that spot and then he attacks. Also, in Unity, something that it does for you that's really, really nice, skin mesh renderers, the ones used for animated characters, will not update when off screen by default. So if the character is off screen, the mesh is frozen. It's literally, it stops rendering. It has to be on the screen in order to update how it looks. Now, the way it actually does that is that every object has a bounds, like a very simple box shape. And if that box that contains everything about the character is within the screen, then it will update the character. That way they know with a very simple calculation, is this box on screen? Okay, good, update character or not.
It also updates if the scene view camera's on them too, though, right? I think.
Yeah, I believe
Yeah,
so.
so I think sometimes people get confused and don't realize it because they're watching it in the scene view and don't realize that if they weren't, it was going to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I would also suggest using one API. I think most people don't know about it. It's calling group API. Yeah, it's API built into Unity. It works similar to LOD system. It tracks if player's camera, if the object is inside camera view or how far from the camera the object is. Through this API, you can make additional things. For example, turn off objects physics is if it's out of range or if it's out of view. You can change how they behave, how they move. You can change their view or turn off all these scripts that you don't need when they are out of your reach. Yeah, rather than checking by distance, this checks the same way that LOD works on the lower level, so it works tons faster than whatever you would write checking by yourself the distance. Yeah, it's amazing API. I use it for. I think I had a scene with 100,000 objects, and it tracked which objects should move, which objects should have scripts on, off, etc.
And this works with occlusion culling, right? So if you got rooms and rooms, you like a distance check wouldn't help you at all with that. You'd have to actually do ray check. So
exactly, it works with the everything.
Yeah,
so it's an amazing tool to use.
Yeah, there's also like the small details here that should be appreciated, where you can use simplified shapes. This is something that a lot of people take very small respect to. Simple shapes are used a lot in games because they're simple to calculate for. All the capsule, sphere, and boxes that you see for collisions, like why don't they have pixel accurate shoes for my character to bump their toes through or something? It's because it's a lot of calculations. Games use the simple boxes for characters' heads, for example, because it's going to be way faster to calculate like 5 boxes as opposed to one head-shaped head.
Yep. Using the mesh collider to have the most fine-tuned, high-fidelity collider so you can have something pass by your nose, or just make it a box. I like the box.
Yeah, and again, the way to think about this, because I always find that people think of this, it's how computers work. It's like, no, it's how everything in life works. If you wanted to say, is somebody in my garden, you could start looking in every corner of your garden. Or if you could somehow do a greater check and say, are they in my city? You don't need to check your garden. You've already established they're not in your garden. And so conceptually, this is all the computers are doing, is they could check pixel to pixel and individually, is it around this corner? Oh, does this thing connect to this thing? Or you could just globally say, is it even within the entire rendering possibility of what I'm looking at? Okay, no. So then there's no point in doing any subsequent checks. And if it is it within radius of 2? If I take the full size of this object and the full size of this object and bump them beside each other, if the distance is larger than that, they physically can't touch. There's no individual pixel that'll ever touch another pixel. So what you do is you gradiate your calculations. You start with, is it in my universe? Is it in my city? Is it in my town? Is it in my house? Okay, now I can start checking my cupboard, right? Now it's worth actually doing the calculations at that fidelity.
I think a big barrier to these optimizations from you working with like other indies and like students who are just starting is it seems like it's more a complication to their implementation and they don't see the direct benefit because they're usually working on much smaller scale things and with much more simplistic logic. So it'll get you in the habit of, well, I don't need to optimize enemies off screen. I don't need to like abstract their behavior or level loading because the scene still loads fine. And as they continue to build and build with the basic system, that's when they start to notice, okay, now my frames are starting to chunk and I just don't know why. Or where can I even begin to cut? It's better to think of your cutting measures early and at least get a little bit of familiarity with these systems than having to go back through the tree and trim each and every unoptimized or fully simulated AI.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like it's hard to catch those things or know exactly what they're going to be in advance. So a lot of the time, like in my experience, it's been we go through and something is slow and we want to work on performance. We profile it and realize it's either something rendering that we probably shouldn't be rendering, or one of the examples I wanted to mention was like server logic that was happening. One of the good examples that I think really showed the AI stuff was on all of the MMOs I've ever worked on, NPCs in general, if there's no player near them within a certain range, at the very least, almost every game I think was split up into like grid-sized chunks. And if nobody was in the grid that you were in or the surrounding grids, all those NPCs would turn off their logic, which also caused problems because occasionally there would be an NPC that like the designer set up and wanted to be doing things throughout. Like it were actually required it to do the scripts, like roam around these different positions and go set some variables, and those could get turned off. So you'd have to actually like force in flags to be able to like always be awake on a specific NPC, so that one could run around, roam the world, and do whatever special thing it did. Or thinking back to one of the first times that I ran into this in a AAA thing was working on a teleportation system in an MMO, and we're shooting up these big beams to show that somebody teleported out, and you could see it like from all the way across the map as long as you were within the grid, because it only replicated out to the grid. So I actually had to like this is when I learned how all of our replication networking stuff worked. I had to talk to the guys and kind of get the run through on how network replication worked, how to set it up with a different channel and make it actually show that to everybody, no matter, as long as you were near there, anywhere in visibility, you could see this giant beam going up of somebody teleporting. And I've seen this a lot.
If you really want to dive into this, a great source for this is emulation, because whenever people take modern systems and emulate it, that tends to be where a lot of you see these weird bugs, and it's like, why doesn't this look the same on computer? It's like, well, because people are trying to recreate these kinds of things that had sort of weird caveats. My favorite example of this is the Dolphin VR emulator is really cool. It's basically, you can play GameCube games as if they're native VR games, which is mind-blowing. Like, and it's really good. Like, it's not just, there was some old stuff back in the day which would just basically strip out the camera and make it 3D. Didn't look great, but this actually works, and it puts you properly, quote unquote, in the game. But certain games that were really aggressive, like Metroid, had really good culling to the point where if you take the camera and just move it slightly back to now being a VR controlled camera, literally all the objects in your periphery are flickering in and out of existence because your field of view is now just large enough that stuff is now weirdly, culling differently. And there's lots of stuff too, like with Zelda, like Ocarina of Time, that opening room that you start in is just, it's a very simple mesh with a projected texture on it. There's no actual geometry in that building, the first room you're in and stuff. And like, you start to learn these things about how some of this was done, and it's quite clever because, again, from performance perspective, you don't need as much information as you often think you do. So it always looked funny to me when I was a kid doing breakdowns of older games, when you'd fly the camera up and all the big buildings in the background would just be like planes and sticks and just stuff that's like clipped bottom on the side of them. It's like, that just looks wrong. It's like, yeah, but it looked right from where you were standing, and that's all that really matters,
You remind me something that's probably worth mentioning. In Tears of the Kingdom, if you try to take a lot of objects and throw them beyond their chunk, they would straight up reset. So one of the very few first things that you can see is like on the floating islands in the starting tutorial, there would be a Korok that's trying to reach their friend on another small floating island with a rail between them. And we are supposed to make like a small device to get the Korok to the other side. But if you fail, the Korok falls down, and you don't want it to fall down. The cute guy is gonna like suffer. But what you see is, as soon as they fall down, they're just going to appear behind you. And that happens to a lot of things. Players are trying to like make a lot of like junk contraptions that like try to move NPCs to locations they're not supposed to. If you put 2 planks below an NPC, you can start lifting them up because they're not going to walk on the planks, but they're going to be pushed by the physics system as it gets like duct tape.
Honestly, moving between chunks is probably one of my most hated problems, because if you're designing a chunk system, you often say persistence as well. So you want to save things into a chunk. The presumption is this object lives here, and if it moves chunk and you want to save, what are you going to do? You have to now migrate its identity into the next chunk. What about saving the old chunk versus the new one? So in general, anytime something moves cross-boundary, it tends to cause hairy issues, which is why if you look at a lot of old games, there's the old kiting AI thing where you just keep doing a certain area. Sometimes it's because it's using a pathfinding system and doesn't want to travel too far. Other times it's because of exactly that, going, look, it lives and knows about this chunk, and if it moves too far out, the entire conceptual universe breaks, so it lives only here,
It knows this room and only this room.
Yeah.
Dustin commented about that on EverQuest. It was like that. You go in a zone, you ditch enemies by running across the zone line because they couldn't actually follow you. And in Vanguard, we had like a big open world, and that was one of the big problems to solve, was that NPCs, as soon as they'd get to the next like zone line, because there were these zones, but it was all supposed to be seamless, they would freak out because they had a different representation. It was not my favorite implementation, but there was a totally different version of the NPCs for proxies that was across zone lines that would then try to have that NPC do all of its stuff, but then send the data back to the server that's actually running the NPC, which caused all kinds of problems because the proxies couldn't do 9 out of 10 things and would usually just bug out and freak out. So it's a whole bunch of work to try to get them to migrate over to a new zone.
There's so much of this. Like in Overwatch, the biggest source of bugs in that entire game was D.Va, the character who explodes from a mech into a character, because it's the only character which actively swaps out who it is to something else. And so they have said there's so many bug fixes where a completely unrelated system gets added and D.Va breaks again because it requires some connections to the system. And there's stuff like this all of the time where and it's not just NPCs or AI. If you follow how Portal it does its physics stuff, think about it, you're basically doing that all the time. You're opening a portal, you're moving a box through a thing into another space. Well, if you follow the Portal speedrunning scene, there's a different time universe in the bubble around the portal. They literally like instantiate a different physics system that exists around the door of the portal to solve a lot of the problems that happen in and out of stuff. And so there's a lot of really complicated math of how you can use that to your advantage. But the fact is, the way stuff works within direct relationship to a portal fundamentally is a different entire set of math calculations than where it works anywhere else in the entire portion of the game.
You also reminded me that in Tears of the Kingdom, you don't only have objects like return to their chunk as soon as they leave it. You also have the chunk entirely reset when you save and load. And this has major ramifications. For example, an NPC can wander around in a chunk, like you're fighting them, you're saving 5 feet away from them, and you reload because you're losing in the fight. What would happen is the NPC will now be at their spawn location within the chunk. So suddenly they're no longer near you. Even though the rest of the state is perfectly replicated, they are not. Objects that you brought with you are also gone. I made a contraption. I was flying in the air. I saved. I loaded. I did not have the contraption. I was just in the air with nothing.
Save and load abuse is a fun one, especially in like the Dark Souls speedrunning scene. I think a lot of the weird swap or weird teleport glitches rely on you exiting and re-entering, and the game doesn't know what chunk to put you in, so it freaks out and spawns you where you probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, it also happens in games like Fallout, where you try to like touch a very small thing that has like a different respawn point, and then you like save and load, and you're suddenly at the point that it put you to be.
Yeah, Doom does that too, where there's invisible bounding boxes outside, and you want to basically clip in to touch roughly the edge corner of one of them. So even if you die, you now teleport halfway across the map to the next one where you've saved to.
And I just want to clarify to everybody watching, like, this stuff is reasonable. There's a reason people do it. It's not like they're insane that they decided to have this convoluted system just so people can bug it out. No. What actually happens is the more details that you want to replicate, the more work you have to put in to actually replicate it. If you have a moving character and that character has armor and you want collision on every single piece of that armor, say it's a Goliath and you want it to carry you over its arm, you're actually going to have to replicate the entire state of the Goliath being in the same animation that's actually carrying you on that arm, which is problematic because, like, how many bones does a living creature have to be replicated this way? Humanoids have like 32 bones. You're going to have to save every single one of their entire transformations. This is the position, the rotation, the scale. You have to know which exact frame in the animation, so you have to know like the exact animation state, and if it's interpolating to like another animation, say the Goliath was just punched, so now it's raising its arm like then it has to know that exact transition point for the perfect application. People don't want to deal with that, so they're just making a very simple Goliath is in this chunk, and that's it. Something that you'll see a lot in Tears of the Kingdom too is how they have objects respawning into the world. So I looked into it a bit, and apparently there is a timer in real world units for when an object should respawn, as long as you're not near it. But a lot of these objects, say apple on a tree that you'd like to grab because it's a healing item, those will respawn over the timer, but the tree itself respawns instantly. So there is this like one forest that's like full of apples, and if you come there and you start cutting down all the trees and you reload the chunk, all the trees are back here. Just a lot of small details like that. Also, somebody earlier asked about rewinding. If it records everything in the game, it does not. It exclusively only records things that are movable and static. When I say static, I mean they're not like an animating creature. So, for example, if it's a moving wheel in the same place, you can rewind that. If it's a fan machine, a fan that blows wind, you can rewind that. The particle system on it, the moving fan itself, not a problem. It's like one object, but the object itself is like literally just like a cylindrical device, and that's what you rewind. Everything on top of that is just like particle systems and physics effectors, etc. But characters cannot be rewound. Objects that are like combined together become static together, so they can be rewound. But if you had like say you put a cart and the cart has a wheel and you put something on the wheel will be rewound separately from the cart. They're two different entities, so it does not rewind the cart with the wheel spinning on it relatively to how it was rewound. The rewind is very simple. It tries to cut down on the information that it has to rewind, which is why I assume they didn't let you rewind creatures.
Right,
Which also gets to what you said before. It's also, don't forget, this also stacks on top of the chunking stuff. It's also only the things within maximum possible range you could ever interact with. And so from a conceptual standpoint, you could have millions of entities, but if the maximum things you can interact with in a space is 400, that sounds like a lot, but it's a lot less in terms of calculating. And so you can keep chunking this down further and further until you only really have to store an absolute fraction of the amount of information.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
if you guys are up for it, I kind of want Corvallis to answer this question. It's been popped up in chat for a while. They were asking what the title was about with the GMTK versus Hugging Face and how they're correlated. They're also asking who MF is and why he's wrong. We'll talk about that after. You want to just jump into that, Corvallis?
Sure.
Can you tell everybody who you are too, since it's your first time on the show? I assume you'll be here a whole bunch of times in the future. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Here's hoping. I'm Corvallis Cohen. I go by PowerCore 2000 online, and I'm a software engineer. I like working with the Unity engine to make my little virtual production programs, devlogs, etc. And I try to do freelancing work. So all my links in my YouTube channel. I've gotten better at consolidating them since the Game Dev Guild. Good advice was given for me to do that. But the title is about the GMTK Game Jam. So for the full story, at the Game Dev Guild 2023, highly recommend, wonderful conference. I worked with others I met to potentially make our own AI game jam because there was a lot of interest in artificial intelligence and how it could be applied to games. When we had a meeting to decide on a date, our coordinator Axel said, "Oh yeah, July 7th." But I knew that was the date of the GMTK game jam. We looked at the itch page to confirm and saw that there was yet another game jam on July 7th, which was Hugging Face's open source AI game jam, set for the exact same duration and time. That looked a bit weird, so when I looked more into it, it was a response to GMTK's game jam banning AI tools. Their initial stance was a restriction on AI, so it could be used for coding, and it could also be used for conceptualization, but no generative content put into the games. Thank you, T. I've VA work coming soon on the freelance page. But they initially allowed you to use AI for conceptualization, but not for generative content or to put content made by AI directly into your game. Then they put a retraction out that rolled that back so that you cannot use AI whatsoever. It cannot be used in coding, it cannot be used in conceptualization, nor art content. And even they mentioned this rule is somewhat enforceable because we all have IntelliSense in our IDE. We're not turning that off, and that is AI-assisted coding. So with that in mind, Hugging Face posted a response saying it actually really sucks because they're the first game jam to ban AI content for fear of flooding it with what they believe is like low quality or uninteresting games. So Hugging Face made their own game jam set for the exact same time and duration. And me, Axel, and I wanted to still have our game jam because we have a difference in like length and duration. I prefer week-long game jams rather than the 48 pressure grind that GMTK and Hugging Face are going for. So we set ours to be farther back in the month, but yeah, now there are about 3 different game jams within the month of July that are kind of competing over the same idea, and it brings up an interesting question of AI in game development because there is a decently vocal schism now, especially with GMTK's decision, on generally artists and how they feel about generative content in games, and programmers versus how they feel about AI and generative assisted tools.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'd like. Yeah. Go ahead.
go your day. I will go after you.
Okay, I just wanted to have a quick remark on IntelliSense. So there is a statement on it being AI, but it's not generative pre-trained AI. It's relatively just solving whatever you're trying to type. For example, if you're trying to write down a word, it can have like a word distance search, like how many letters do you need to reach the next word? Are you starting a very long name that it can complete for you? That's not AI per se, is just a search algorithm. As for words that are similar, that's also just a search algorithm. There's not like AI in there. But Copilot is an entirely different story, where it's actually trying to like guess the entire set of lines of code based on your intention, based on the class name, etc. That is actually generative.
Yeah, but I would also want to know because, for example, let's say Photoshop. The new AI added by Google is one thing, but Photoshop in its backend for lots of tools uses AI. They don't describe
Even the
which
neural
of them,
filters and stuff. Yeah.
even if the filters, they don't describe which are generative AI, but many of them are. So you won't be using Photoshop because mostly you want to know which tool that you use, because for them they're selecting object selection, I think the neural filters, skyline placements, content aware fill, face aware, enhanced details, autotone are all AI based, some of them generative AI based tools. So they are banning Photoshop and banning many tools that game developers are using these days. Yeah.
Well, I will say my hot take to this is I think in good faith most people know what they mean, and we can play these games about specifics that yes, there are a lot of stuff out there that has AI to some capacity, but the truth of the matter is, if you go by the spirit of what the intention is, it is pretty clear. The idea is, is it something that is going to be predominantly generated by you and you're using tooling and assisting, or are you writing something to actually generate the content itself? Now, I still think it's all fear-mongering and afraid of the wrong thing. I think it's a dumb choice to make, but I'm not going to pretend I don't understand the philosophy of what they're going for. So as far as I'm concerned, I stand by the decision to do that. It's a perfectly fine one. I just think it's a dumb one because you have a lot more cooler opportunities to allow people who wouldn't be able to do certain things to facilitate those different, like it seems to me that it's just because it's new and scary, but in an alternate universe, you could have said the same thing about, well, you can't use art that you get from any other source that you didn't make yourself. Some game jams do that, but that's like saying you can't use asset store stuff. Yeah.
I've been
So-
plenty of game jams used to, at least I don't know if they still do, but plenty of them were like, you can't use anything from the asset store. You can't use code or art assets or anything.
They've gotten more lax, so generally like art from the asset store is acceptable. Code starts to get a bit hairier because now that's very much a moderator by moderator scenario, but I probably just agree identically with Jason's story. It's especially in the sense of 48-hour jams, because I've participated in a couple of game jams at this point, and I prefer the weaker long format because it's far less burnout intensive and far less work intensive. With those tiny pressure cooker jams, at least with AI, it could be faster and more secure to like do certain elements, because I've had entire jams break because there was a mild issue with a source control commit and I had to get into Git and start resolving large binary conflicts via the command line. Not fun, would not recommend. So with some level of guideline and with some level of accelerant tools with content creation and programming, I feel like jams are the perfect place in order to have those kinds of tools, but banning them seems again like it's scary and upset. There are some valid arguments I've definitely heard, because I do listen to quite a few of the artist complaints, like in regards to things like Midjourney or larger AI image data sets that scraped data from public use and never asked for permission from any of the artists on data sets that they're subsequently trained on and use.
Yeah, there's a question of how do you protect yourself from something you doesn't know exists yet, and so like artists couldn't protect themselves from something that it's like all the other issues we had with copyright law for the internet. It's like there literally wasn't exist. This stuff wasn't there for you to be able to make the tools to protect yourself. Now, all of that being said, on the actual game jam specific front, I actually think the philosophy is wrong from the start, because in my personal opinion, what is the point of a game jam? Now, you can say it's one of two things. It's either to shore up your skills and physically learn how to do something in a time period that you wouldn't by pushing across your perfectionism, which is really cool. It's good to have that skill. But if it is from a love of games perspective, then brass tacks, brutally honest, most games suck not because they didn't have the right art or they didn't have the right code. It's because most people do not know how to do not understand game design. Game design is a job. It is an entire job in and of itself. And understanding balance and level design and all of that. The amount of really cool game jam games that are mechanically sound by the end of the week or whatever it is you're doing, and then they kind of burn out and just slap together a bunch of boxed rooms that really don't show the possibilities of the mechanics they built, is most of them. That is the normal end case for most game jams. A cool mechanic that requires another week or two afterwards, and games are always at their best 2 weeks after a game jam where the developers have like finally had a bit of breathing room to push the boundaries. Now, philosophically, I believe that if you allowed for AI generative stuff, you empower more people to focus on the bits that are actually the weakest parts of most game jam games during the time period of the game jam. Yeah. And so that's my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, obviously, some game jams I would imagine have constraints specifically aimed at, you know, I don't know how to describe the point of that jam, right? If the like an art contest, probably would want to ban AI art if it's about can you paint with your hand, yeah, obviously. So I can see that, but at the same time, it certainly seems like AI is just a tool in the toolbox for the developer, and like let people use the tools in the toolbox. Again, math competition, banning calculators because they want to see if you can do it in your head, and that's the point. Great, do that. But a math competition where you're just like, hey, let's do math together. Why not use calculators? You know, same deal.
I think a lot like the jams where you got to make your own art, just a different type. I really quickly wanted to just mention, Jason, you were talking about game designers, and I feel like everybody who's not in the game dev industry doesn't realize that they're a thing. I've had to literally explain to people, bosses, that we needed game designers outside of game companies, starting game companies, and my wife is the best part. So you guys have all met Salim. I don't know if Corvallis has met Salim. I have to meet him sometime. But he's a game designer I've been working with for like the last 15 years or however long it's been. And we would always talk about what he did. My wife would always ask me, so what does Salim do? She's like, does he make the code or draw the art? And I was like, no, he designs the game. She's like, so is he like making the code like you do or doing the art? It's like just trying to explain the actual design process and that position that it not only exists but is probably the most important. Well, I would say it's probably more important than the art and as important as the code, because you need both of them to have the game actually work. But I think the design is probably the rarer part that really sets things aside though, and makes the game cool. And if you want a successful game, a good designer is going to be kind of the key component.
If I can make a quick remark here for a lot of people that don't understand the actual details of game designers, it's like being the idea guy, and people are like, oh, I can come up with ideas for you. It's easy. I'll be a game designer right now. That's not how this works. Like a game designer would go into the fine details and actually make sure that they're going to work on the first try, so you don't spend a bunch of like resources on trying to get something that isn't well thought out and is not going to work from the start. It's like saying, I want an object that moves fast. Okay, how does the object look? And they're like, I don't know, it's fast. And like, okay, does it like use wheels? Does it use boxes? What does it use to go fast? I don't know, it's fast. This is where game designers come in and say, okay, if you want something that like moves fast, here is a bunch of wheels, and if you put them on the stick, they're like standing together, but they roll because they're like wheels. Like if you put a propeller here, the wheels move forward, so now it starts moving, and it's faster than you can walk it around, so now it's fast. How fast does it need to be though, etc.
Game designers are like a vital organ to like just games in general. And I know quite a few designers who are limited because they might not be technically savvy, so they want to participate in a game jam, but they don't have the immediate technical skills. They are focused purely on design, and they're good designers. So I encourage them to use these tools because it allows them to very quickly iterate, test out some of their designs. You don't have to now take the month plus or longer on YouTube Unity courses and learn the basics of C# to be able to start to make your game, ChatGPT can help you get a little bit of the way there, and you can learn bits and pieces of coding and nice refinements along the way.
One thing
we've talked about before about level designers in games. Like honestly, we all know this. We all have that friend who uses like the level designer in Tony Hawk or Doom or Quake or Portal, and they make really fun things. But like I know people who are really good programmers who every level they make is absolute pants because they don't understand. Like they enjoy levels and they can code things, but whenever they're asked to like put a level together, they have no concept of the actual narrative flow structure that you need in a good composed level of what it's experientially driven. And without getting into a whole big meta conversation about this, every industry has this kind of a job and people often underestimate it. Like the amount of products that exist and the overarching question is, who is this for? Who wants this product? And the answer is usually nobody does, because somebody on paper said it sounds good, but nobody actually did the research and learned what people want and learned how people work. And I've had this firsthand. And the clearest example to me ever is with VR. When VR first came out, it was like, oh, VR, it takes everything and adds extra dimensions. We can make every industry better. You're an architect, you can render your buildings in VR. That's like cool. That seems to make logical sense. You work in spreadsheets, we can then put your spreadsheets in VR. It's like, okay. I mean, I can see where like you can conceptually, there's more information and whatever. But if you go to somebody who does this for a living and ask them, do you want this? They'd be like, God, no. I spent my entire life learning this set of tools. What will that give me other than a headache? So a lot of this boils down to, you could be the world's best programmer or the world's best artist, but you're meant to be delivering a cohesive experience. And if you don't understand experience design, then the other parts don't really matter. You could have the best composed pieces, but the actual product will suck. So someone who understands the composition portion is vitally important.
There's also something to be said about like you're tailoring an experience. This is why we have like experience designers as a job. Game designers are designing the game. The game is the experience that you're having, and you have to make it familiar and like easy to have, intuitive. If you're bringing something that's alien for no benefit whatsoever, nobody's going to want it because it's just more to learn, more to have a headache with, but it has no inherent value. Something that's familiar is going to be easier to pick up, but it still has no inherent value. Something that's designed for entertainment, aka a game, then it has value. But if it's too alien to you, it's still going to be a lot of work to like get people into it. So a game that uses familiar concepts is like what's better, and game designers understand this. This is like part of the job. You have to know how to make something that's intuitive to understand and feels good to play.
It's a shifting landscape too. Like here's something, like I really don't think people appreciate how really clever this is. And as someone who didn't even like the game that much, I was kind of impressed purely from an academic's perspective. Imagine you had like and this is before the new Doom had come out. You were tasked with, hey, Doom was a really popular game, really, really, really popular. You have to reinvent it for a modern audience. By the way, we now live in a world post Halo and post, cover shooters. The entire landscape has changed. How people conceptualize space and cover and health bars and what they expect from AI has changed. And if you look at that at a macro level, games have slowed down. Games like Gears of War are a lot more about the positioning and the corners and the slow pace and getting angles. And you compare that to the run and gun style of something like Doom. How do you design a game like that for modern day and still manage to keep the current player base happy? And it may seem like a small thing, but whoever came up with the idea that you, when your health is low, rather than running for cover, you run at the enemies to do a finisher move to get health back, that is not a small fun tweak. That is a conceptual milestone which bridges a gap between an old style of gaming and a new one by saying, in a world where you have regenerating health, how do you do that in a modern era where the actual design philosophy is about running away? How do we regain the original design philosophy of moving forward? Well, what if the actual act of losing health is tied intrinsically to risk-reward combat? That solves that problem. That is what a game designer does. They solve what actually takes the pieces and makes it into a game you would actually want to play.
And you're actually encouraging the fun too. Like when you want a player to run forward, you're wanting them to be Doom Guy. You're creating the Doom Guy experience by saying, okay, my health is low, I'm going to take your health from you directly. Instead of just sitting behind a cover and hiding. Yeah, go ahead.
It rewards that combat and aggression. And now from Doom, I've seen other games that now play with that concept rather than just hiding behind cover. Admittedly, the cover shooter, because it established itself so heavily, it's now been ripped apart because now no one wants to touch cover shooters. It was seen as a detriment to have that slow-paced combat. I just had two thoughts at the same time and butchered that sentence. Let me restart. with more games rewarding aggression, games like Ultra Kill come to mind because that game is wonderful at balancing your ability to move forward and continue fighting. You regain health by specifically the blood of your enemy splashing onto you. So you have to get into close range, which is hard because the faster an enemy is, the more damage potential it has. Now there's a very fun risk versus reward and a nice pacing introduced. And the other thought was, this is the sad part, cover shooters, by taking over so much of the shooting genre, are now kind of experiencing the same issue of no one really wants to touch a hide behind cover and regain health system. Games have tried to move away from that very much so because it got so oversaturated and was seen as boring because people weren't innovating on that design. But I feel like you can have a cover shooter and innovate on that design to try to make it more engaging. It just requires, again, a good designer with a lot of passion for cover shooters.
There's a lot to say about like time and respect for players' time in games. This is actually something that I want to bring up as criticism for Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, but more so in Tears of the Kingdom now that I'm like familiar with the game. There are a lot of moments that I feel like are disrespectful to players' time, specifically around the puzzles. And I'm going to be very careful with how I'm wording it because it's not like I hate it. I just feel like it could have been done in a way that's more intuitive. Puzzles in Zelda Tears of the Kingdom like chambers. You go in exactly like Portal. There's a puzzle, you have to solve it, and every time that something goes wrong in that puzzle, you kind of wait a bit and then it resets for you. Like a ball falls down, it goes for a slide, it falls down into a pit, it respawns at the top, the path repeats itself. But every single time that you want to have an attempt at solving the puzzle with that ball, you have to wait until it's the exact same like the exact right location for the solution, and that's a few seconds shaved off your life. And if you slow down the ball with the rewind, as I mentioned earlier, that wipes the velocity, that ball is now moving slower, and now you're wasting 30 seconds of your life just waiting for the ball to pick up the pace again, fall down, respawn, etc. If you lost some health and now you're like falling into the pit and you have to wait until the screen like puts you back into place, etc. There are a lot of places in Zelda Tears of the Kingdom that just waste your time in order to return to the proper state. It's not only that, it's like on smaller things, like every time you want to heal yourself, you have to open a menu stuff, like picking out what you want to eat. If you want to cook, you have to cook each item individually. You cannot like mass cook like 3 apples and 1 banana or something. So everything in Zelda Tears of the Kingdom takes a lot of your time, and it's sometimes things that you don't feel are valuable. I don't want to worry about my health because I have like more than 200 healing items in my inventory, but I don't want to have to open the menu every time I want to eat. And I know I'm only getting half the value if I'm opening the menu and eating the items straight away. I have to cook them to double their value. So now I have to go find like a cooking station and I have to do that. And they had the genius to give you portable cooking stations, but they only work for one use. So you open the menu, you put down the cooking station, you pick up the items, you put them in the cooking station, they cook, and then the cooking station is gone. So it only has one use.
I will say, in general, from day one, that's been one of my biggest frustrations with the new direction Zelda as a franchise has taken. Is it's so menu heavy. Like, as someone who doesn't play, like I did play when younger a little bit of Final Fantasies and those kinds of games, but like literally time stops. Those are games about thinking about problem solving. I really hated the fact that Zelda used to be about walking around and exploring, and now even when I'm walking around and exploring, I'm mentally thinking, oh, should I hit it with that sword? No, I want to save that one in case something bigger. And now I'm playing this meta narrative of like managing my inventory and my stuff and cycling menu items and pop-ups. Like, I've never watched someone play any of the new Zelda games and not see the menu consistently flash up on screen, because the skill ceiling of that game is the better you get better at using the menus. That's not really how I want those games to work, right? And so for me, I've always bounced off this new approach. I was very much a fan of the narrative, earlier kind of hero's journey style of Zelda, and I find that to me, almost every design decision of the new ones is more about play, and it follows Nintendo's general ecosystem of extrinsic motivation rather than intrinsic. Intrinsic rather than extrinsic in terms of you doing your own play. But that always bothered me, because I liked the story where I do a big mission and I end with a cool sword. That's what I wanted, and that entire philosophy of like engaging with the environment and getting a reward for doing so isn't there anymore. It's now the environment exists, you exist. figure it out and have some fun. And that is fun sometimes, but it's not what I originally bought into the Zelda franchise for, which was like, guy hands you sword and says, off you go, and you have to find more things to get better as you go.
Yeah, there is a lot to say about the menu work. It's not just the whole weapons. By the way, it actually got worse in Tears of the Kingdom now because you combine items. And for whatever reason, beyond my comprehension, you get the ability to combine any item to any item. Yeah, you can take like a sword and you can combine it to a spear. And now you have a sword that you swing and it actually has the range of the spear. Great, fantastic. You have an arrow, like a bow. You want to shoot arrows with it. You want to stick things to the bow. There are fruits that like explode in fire, ice, bombs. Like you can put diamonds on them for extra damage. Don't do that. The diamonds are worth a lot of rupees. But when you want to put something, you have to open a menu. You have to side scroll like left and right. There is no skip button, 5 items to the right or left. You have to move individual items from all the items in the material section in the game to find the one that you want, and then you combine it and then you make the one shot. And if you put it down, it kind of remembers the position unless you sorted your inventory for whatever reason, because the material section also has all your fruits and stuff. And I would still say that's fine, because if I want to keep shooting like bomb arrows, I can like make a shot, press up, bomb, press up, bomb, press up, bomb. But for weapons, it's not like that. Anything that you'd like to combine, you kind of have to like throw down. You can't just in the menu say, hey, this material, I want to combine it to a weapon. You can't. You have to pick it up, throw it down, pick the weapon, enable the power of the combine, hold the weapon out, press the combine button for the weapon. It's like, it's minimum 6 buttons if you're entirely prepared for it. You cannot do that comfortably in a fight. It's frustrating. And it's also like that for the shields. Shields are not as much of a big topic because like, first of all, you use them less, I found. And secondly, when you actually use them, they last like longer with fun effects. For example, you can attach a flamethrower to a shield, and now Link has a flamethrower, always available, which is like an insane development as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, the menu work is like, it's lacking quality of life. And it's bad for a game that's so menu heavy. I would have done every single thing in my power to reduce the amount of menu work that you have to do. To its benefit, you can carry infinite materials. It's kind of weird to me because you're very limited on the amount of weapons and shields you can carry, but like the materials themselves have at it. Yeah.
I guess an interesting thought is there a way to design menu work to be more engaging, or is the only way to up engagement is reducing menu work? Because I think of there's just like a quick examples. I think of the Souls games. For high level PvP, your skill cap is how quickly you can flip through the menus. So explicitly called hot swapping weapons and equipment to suddenly change up your equip load for another person and be able to use that load is something I can just not do. Like I use a controller that is beyond what I want to do, nor what I might be physically capable of. So
well there's more than one
way?
solution. Again, so different games have tackled this in different ways. Like, if you want the prototypical version of this, it's health bars. There's the biggest universal problem in video games in general. If there's one problem in all of video games that to this day has not been solved satisfactorily, it's how do you punish a player? Because every variation of that, whether it's death, resetting progress, rewatching cutscenes, doing quick time events, health bars, checkpoints, every version of this is the same thing. It's how do I punish a player? Because you do need punishment for things to have any kind of weight. And so that's the sort of prototypical problem that underpins all of video game narrative. Second to that is stuff. If you get stuff, how do you manage that and all of these problems? And different games try different things. And it basically boils down to 2 things. 1, what is the intent of the user? And 2, what's their proficiency as a user. So from the intent perspective, if your game has very clear intents where you're only doing 1 of 5 tasks, your job is much easier because you can have shortcuts and autocomplete. Take Prince of Persia. Like, if you're running at a wall and you're doing a jump, you're doing a wall run. There ain't a lot of options you've got in that environment. And so from a design perspective, you can infer intent a lot easier than you can in other scenarios. But if you give yourself this infinite landscape of player creativity, divining intent from the player is infinitely harder, and then that leads to that problem. And so how do you do that? Well, oftentimes you limit the problem. Just like we talked about with AI, it all circles back around. You limit the domain space. Rather than trying to solve the problem of 500 individual things a player could do at any given time, you give them less options. And I don't mean like literally in the moment you give them less options. You give them less options in a way that lets you work with it. And what do I mean by that? Loadouts. That's what loadouts are. They are me saying your options are become tanky, become run and gun, become whatever. And I'm giving you the same thing. I'm giving you all the options to pick from, but I'm letting you define the problem space down. So now it's 3 or 4 options and not infinite options that were there before. So I'm not saying that's the right answer. I'm just saying that there are different ways to approach the problem. And it usually boils down to, can you help the player define intent earlier? Can you either contextually give different items when they're relevant? Can you show items at the top of the list which are closer? If I take out a bow, show me the things I'm most likely to attach to a bow at the stop. Or alternatively, let me preset favorites. And I know you can make basically in Tears of the Kingdom, you can make preset machines, and then it's pretty clever. It'll either use the stuff in inventory, or if there's stuff in the surrounding area that helps build that, it'll suction those up. So there are solutions to these problems. But yeah, that's basically it. I wanted to bring it up from a meta commentary perspective too, because a lot of people, if you look at this from a game designer's lens, which goes back to like, what does a game designer do? It's not about solving the inventory problem or solving the health problem. It is about what is the player's philosophy and relationship to this mechanic? How does it impact the gameplay experience as a holistic thing? And how do I solve that relationship so it's satisfying? And so the inventory problem isn't really an inventory problem. It's how do I, in a place with lots of possibility space, limit the possibility space so I have a better understanding of the player's intent at this given moment in time. That's the real problem you're trying to solve. And yeah, it's a complex one.
I'd actually like to put a remark on that. This is not the problem I would say you're trying to solve. When you have an inventory, what you're trying to solve is it tedium or is it the fun part? And if everything is the fun part, everything is fair game. There are games that literally turn the inventory into a game system that's supposed to be like part of the fun.
That's fair. It can be a mechanic in and of itself. That is a good point.
Yeah. Inventory Tetris exists as a term for a reason. So there are games that like will actively put mechanics of like how you store your items will actually affect how you play. So now it like has a possibility space of like, oh, I put this item to the side, now I have more damage, or on the left now it gives me more defense, or now it won't fall down from my rack, etc. So for me, the main point is the menu tedium? And if yes, can I remove the tedium? Or how much can I remove the tedium? Also, the ability that you mentioned, auto build, it's actually a really slow menu. And it has a lot of the same problems as I mentioned earlier. One thing that is very frustrating about it is that as a player in Tears of the Kingdom, you can actually gain like capsules that contain device parts, and you can take them out when you feel like it. So if you're like missing a fan to make like a really cool device right now to move a bit upwards, you can like bring out a fan capsule, pop it, and then like you have a fan in front of you. And then for auto build, it will actually pick it up and like design with it. Also, it has like very fun exploits, by the way.
Well, that's where it gets to like, without getting into like a meta of how I would structure this. If you divide it into normal users and power users, at power user level, the way I would want a system like that to work would be a series of shortcuts. So rather than being menu items, a good example of this, the old Nokia 3310 phone, every menu item in that had numbers attached to it. And so if you were a teenager and you were in a hurry to try to type messages to your friends, especially if your phone's in your pocket and you can't take your phone out of your pocket, you learned swiping down the middle. So enter 259 and then pressing 3 would drop you through the 3 menus into Compose, and then open the Compose menu. And if you knew the number for each of your friends, you could literally type a 7-digit number in your pocket, and it would bring up starting a text to type to that person without ever looking at your phone. And so similarly, if you were playing Zelda a certain way, and there's certain object you use, you're playing a very arrow heavy build or a very bomb heavy build, you could theoretically have combos that map to certain items, and then by pressing arrow, arrow, bomb, or arrow, whatever sequence you would for the items, it could compose the object by intuiting what you build by using the stack of there are ways to do this. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying there's a way to have a layer, which would mean the average person can basically play combos in a fighting game and generate stuff in a way that doesn't bring up any menus and doesn't require you to have to go through anything complicated because you are pre-building it yourself. But again, it gets like pretty complicated at that stage, and I don't think I wouldn't even want that back in for that game. But I'm just saying, like, there are ways to go about this.
You're making me feel old, Jason. I just remembering how much I used to text in my pocket. I used to send a lot of text messages just in my pocket, never pull my phone out. You're driving down the street, and I could send a text message in my
It's
pocket.
the biggest thing missed from this generation. I swear. I now feel like
Yep.
an old man. Every time I take out my phone, I have to do that whole. Oh, there we go. And I used to
Oh my
literally,
God.
I would just one hand, and I would just be able to like send 6 text messages to different people. And I wouldn't even like take the phone out of the pocket.
I had a ringtone, so you know who was calling without looking at the phone.
Yeah.
I used to sell them. I used to be the kid in school who found out because in the Nokia phones they had a compose feature which lets you type in the chords or the different notes to play. And so if you were smart, you could find websites where people have pre-written out popular songs as the key presses, and I would print them out and I would sell them as sheets in school as like whatever the latest songs are and sell them for ringtones. There you go.
Ah, suckers.
Nice. So, Yorai, are you ready to jump onto the Dev Blitz? Because I think this is gonna be an interesting one.
Yeah, sure. So, would you like me to explain it like real quick?
Yeah, for people who have no idea, I think we've talked about the Dev Blitz days a couple times, but I bet there's probably plenty of people who still have no idea what it is.
Yeah. Okay. So first off, what is a Dev Blitz Day? Unity had a problem of communication in the past where they've been quiet for a long time. It would be hard to get answers from the developers directly. Since then, they've gotten way better about answering questions on the forums, and now they're holding a regular event every few weeks or so, where they'll have a Dev Blitz Day about a specific topic. The developers for that topic are going to go look at a specific forum section created for that Dev Blitz Day, and in threads that are there, if they feel they can answer them, they will. Every Dev Blitz has like its own specific topic. This one was about graphics, so they'll answer anything about, say, global illumination, shaders, SRP, URP, HDRP, insert other words that are like acronyms, graphics devices, texturing, meshes, and more. And if you ask them questions that like they have the capacity to answer, they'll likely answer them. So naturally, a lot of people like flock to that to get the ways to solve like complex problems that they have that are not covered on the documentation or in threads, or asking like what is the status of things. And you can get a lot of really interesting information about how Unity is being planned out these days from that, as well as answers for very fun and advanced topics. A lot of great people that I follow have been in the Dev Blitz. For example, Jason Booth has like multiple posts here. I asked some questions myself. I even got one very interesting answer for me. And I just wanted to bring it up. Following Dev Blitz days is like a very fun experience. It's also great to see the developers interacting with the community and like actually giving their own opinion. And one thing that I really appreciated is that developers this time directed users a lot more to the roadmap submit feature request button, which implies that they're taking the requests in to hopefully manage in the future. And I've seen one person saying that the request has been like added to the board so far. At least that's what I understood from when I was reading it. So I just wanted to bring up like, hey, Dev Blitz days are here. They're cool. They're awesome. Do you want to go into details and like talk about them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people definitely need to know about them and should be aware. I wish I would have sent out an email beforehand to remind everybody it was coming. I didn't have any questions, but I think they're doing these, from what I understand, once a month too, and it's just a different topic. And I could be wrong, but my understanding was that the entire team just kind of focuses the entire day on the Blitz, or at least that's the goal. Like they're really focused on that for feedback, both receiving feedback and giving back advice. But again, I'm not 100% sure. That's just my best understanding. What was your question, by the way?
So I asked 3 questions. They were mostly technical in nature. That said, the questions don't have to be technical in nature. They actually have like a very nice post at the top for basic rules, when you can ask the questions, what questions should be, maintaining code of conduct. If a question is very specific to your one case, they will likely not answer it. But if it's something that like applies to more users, they'll probably look into it. And again, if you're just interested about things, they can answer that. So for me, I had 3 questions and they answered 1. The one that they answered was specifically regarding to how would I move pre-skinned vertex positions off a mesh into a shader so I can do fun effects on it. And it's actually inspired by having played Tears of the Kingdom. So I guess I should explain that first. In Tears of the Kingdom, at a specific point in the game, you're going to have a certain cutscene, and in that cutscene, which happens 4 times, power is going to move through one character's hand, and it's going to make the character's hand glow, and it would move from their arm towards the hand into Link's hand, and then from Link's hand it's like going to go all the way over their arm and then back into the core of the hand and coalescing onto one point. And there are a lot of ways to implement it, but it brought up something very interesting to me, which is how would you implement a visual effect where a character has a part of their body glow and it would actually be relevant to that part of the body while maintaining some semblance of space? So to explain this, say I'm writing a shader and I'm saying this is the point I want to follow, the center of my hand. But now I'm bringing the hand to my head. Is my head going to glow? If it's the same object and it's rendering and the hand is close to the hand, it's going to glow. But that's not how I want it to go. I want the power to flow through the hand, not reach the head, essentially. So how would you implement that? So characters, as they're pre-skinned, skinning means moving the character based on the bone rotations, etc., to the animated position. When they're not skinned, they're likely in an A position or T position, where the character's hands are like stretched out exactly. Thank you, Jason. So the hands are like very far from all the other limbs, which is perfect for what I'm trying to make. So you can get that pre-skinned position usually only when the mesh is in read-write mode, where you can actually access it through the CPU, and then you can like pass it to a different mesh channel. Meshes in Unity have multiple channels of information that you can give them. So for example, there are the vertex normals, the vertex positions, the vertex colors, the vertex UVs, which are used for texture sampling. And you have actually multiple UV channels. So for example, when you bake light, it goes into a different UV channel than the regular UV channel of the mesh itself that you made. And there are like 8 of those channels, and they're not limited to just 2 coordinates. It's called UV, but it's actually vector 4s behind the hood. So you can have like 4 pieces of information per channel. And how would you actually do that? So I asked. And they gave me a very interesting answer that I wasn't aware of, despite looking in the documentation prior. I actually forgot this is a thing because I have such little use of it, and I've actually been starting a research now because I was surprised that I actually forgot something existed to such a degree. So what they suggested was to use the skinned mesh renderer get vertex buffer, which lets you see the vertices as they're like passed. So it's complicated. A mesh has a buffer of vertices that's like on the GPU that you can access. And you don't actually have to have the mesh readable on the CPU in order to use. You can actually pass the buffer to a material, the material being for rendering on the GPU. And then you can access it and then like do all the things that I wanted without, first off, custom asset post-processors to move it to the UV channel, without setting it to read-write so that I can do it at runtime without the UV channel. It's like, it's fantastic.
So you can do it all kind of in the shader?
Yeah, so you just pass it to the material, the buffer, and then you sample the buffer based on the vertex index, and then you can do the effect that you wanted. So this is one of the questions that I asked. The other questions are a lot more pain-induced, I would say, from having tried things and finding that there is no solution in Unity for it. So one question was about rendering scenes in isolation, which is something that a lot of games do, but they do via hackery, as far as I know. So just to set a scene, understanding like what I'm actually talking about. Say you have a character, and that character is in the world, and you open the inventory screen, and the inventory screen has the character showing itself with its armor. So when you equip a new armor, you can see it on the character without being like in the world. It's like it's a clone of the character that like has all the armors and stuff. This is a very common thing that you see in games. Sometimes the character would actually animate, like they would like scratch their head or something when they're having a new piece of armor. Like they would look at their new shirt, etc. So it's an animated character while the rest of the game is like kind of paused, and you want to have that happen. Now, usually, if you used Unity for a bit, the first thing that would come up is, oh yeah, I'll just have 2 cameras and one of them would render a separate layer. That has so many issues as far as I know. Specifically, because if your character has VFX, say you have a flaming glove, because the character has like elements or something, I don't know. And that flaming glove has a special layer because you want to render fire in a special way. Now you have to make sure that it doesn't break if you change the layer so the character renders in the menu. Also, if your character spawns things, like if that fire glove sometimes emits embers, and those embers are via instantiate for God knows why, you actually have to track everything down and make sure, hey, you're supposed to be on that layer. Don't go into the game layer. You are in the menu layer. It is a mess to track. Now, at one point in time, I said, okay, I'll figure it out. I'll find something that I can do for it. I tried to set a character 3,000 units away from the game world. Didn't work out for me because one of the effects had an always visible kind of shader, so it would go through terrain and you could actually like see a spark play in the back. It was frustrating. Then I decided to do like other things. Long story short, there is no fun solution here. When all hope was lost, I checked the documentation again about the camera. There has to be a way to render just specific objects for the camera. And there was this field, camera.scene. I almost lost myself in anger because it sounds so intuitive. You just set the scene that the camera would render, right? Wrong. So if you go into the documentation about the camera.scene, it will actually tell you this only works on new preview scene context, which is like editor-only scenes for like the scene view. It was so frustrating. You have no idea how much I wanted to scream at that point in time. So I asked, how do you actually do that these days? No response yet. On that note, I also looked if Dots can do it, because Dots has like an encapsulated world. You can have multiple worlds. They have no interaction with each other. Surely, if you have a renderer in one world, it will not render in the other world. How do I set the other world to render? Entities renderer does not support rendering multiple worlds at this time.
You can only have one. Just don't.
Yeah. No, it's not that you can only have the main world rendering. You can't like have things. They use render static static batching in direct. I forgot the name, but they basically make a batch for rendering and it's always on once it's there. So it's like hard to disable it and enable something else. Very frustrating. And the other thing is like accessing things that are unique to the Unity SRPs, specifically the scriptable render pipeline will let you have render features. And render features are basically a pack of code that may have some settings that injects itself into the render pipeline so that at a step in rendering, like after you draw the skies, you draw your own stuff, or you collect some information and then you can draw with it later. That's all great. Except sometimes you need information from your specific render pipeline to know how to render your own stuff. For example, if you're using forward rendering or defend rendering, you may want to use different features. And some asset creators would have complex effects that actually care about that. They need to know if you're rendering in deferred or not, so that their stuff don't break, because they use like fundamentally different shader strategies. And you can't access that information. It's not public, it's internal. So they use reflection for it. And because they don't know what your setting is, they have to make sure that you're not changing it on the fly. Like, they have to make sure that at runtime, you will not change that field from forward to deferred, which is insane on its own. So they use reflection every frame. And reflection every frame means memory allocation every frame. Not something I want. So I asked if that like could be improved upon. And no response yet. I hope they've taken it, like at least somebody has seen it and like made a note. I don't know. Yeah, that's about it.
Nice. Yeah, I assume they've got that marked down at least. But yeah, I like I said, I wish I had realized and sent the email out so everybody could have submitted their questions when it was going on. But the next one should be coming up in probably like 3 weeks.
Probably so. There's also a lot of information that's like in general interesting there. For example, somebody asked about like how should you clear the camera every frame? Should you even clear the camera every frame? There's like a very interesting case here, because if you're always rendering something and it's always going to render over the entire screen, do you actually need to clear the camera? Like, yeah, you can get some performance improvements on that. Jason Booth also wanted like a post-mortem in the past, which was very interesting to read. And this time he asked about the state of certain features. It's really nice to see like the team actually responding to those kinds of requests. And so it's worth looking to learn a lot, is basically what I'm saying.
Just digging through, reading the questions, and learning a bit. I totally agree.
Yeah, because it's literally the developers of Unity telling you how to use Unity. This is like stuff that the documentation doesn't necessarily cover because you don't understand like feature A interacts with feature B in a certain way. And they're like
Mhm.
saying, if you want them to interact, here is how you have them interact in the best way possible. Which is, something that we're sorely lacking because there's so many permutations of like how mechanics can interact. And on that note, I think it may be worth mentioning LTS.
Yeah. So the LTS is dropping in just a couple weeks, right?
Yeah, so the Unity just had a blog post about the Unity 22 LTS coming in June. Thanks, Andrew. So they have, in general, you're not supposed to expect a lot from LTS, but this time it's a special LTS because we're getting dots.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and that's what I'm afraid of.
Why are you afraid of it, Pavel?
Because for me, LTS should be the version that's more stable and has the least bugs. If you're adding lots and lots of features, then there will be bugs. If you're changing a lot of APIs, there will be lots of bugs with them. Yeah, and last LTS wasn't stable. And it didn't add anything. There was major.
I think the disconnect here, Paul, is I don't think you know what LTS stands for. It's let the testing start.
That's the good version. I would assume that it's for that. Yeah, I think that 2021 LTS started not having bugs around 10th version or 15th. But we are right now testing the finished the lava and plan the versions for HDP European standard. We found so many bugs in the LTS version, in some basic features that should just work. Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. Yeah, I love when Unity gives us new features, but they shouldn't be added in LTS.
Yeah, so my own take here is the patches for an LTS version are where the stability comes from. LTS is just another version with the tag long-term support. It doesn't mean that it's stable. It means they're going to fix it for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
they're going to stop adding new things, ideally, right? After the LTS,
yeah, so
that's the last one.
The one fun thing I would say about this is that because they're only making one LTS a year, and usually a lot of developers don't get the recommendation of starting like as soon as an LTS launches. It's like usually if you're starting a year and you're saying this time I'm going to become a game developer and it's January, that's already like when the LTS hasn't dropped yet. Because notice the time, we're in May, end of May, and we're getting the LTS in June. It's coming at the middle of the year, so it means previous LTS already had like past half a year of validation, like when the new year rolls around. So if you're starting relatively at the start of a year, you have a relatively stable LTS that's already been out for like half a year. That's the one that's fixed. The using latest LTS is literally only use the one that had the longest time to sit and like only polish bugs, not the one with the newest features which will have more bugs.
You're opting into the beta for it to be fixed, meaning it's not fixed yet.
Yeah, but the thing is that when you update LTS versions, things don't break generally. Generally, very big asterisk here.
Yeah,
Pal's the exception, I guess.
He's not the exception. I had it break on me 4 times already.
I've had it break on my older projects. Yes.
Yeah, you want a simple choice? We tested LTS 2021.3 LTS version. Patch 0.16 works. From patch 18 up, some features of shaders don't work. For example, on URP, when you have a mission, you can't have a mission that goes into node that gives you time. Unity time node in shaded graph breaks the mission. If you write your own custom shader node that takes time and puts there, works. That shader node from time in URP breaks the emission totally. From 2021.3.70 up.
I guess here's a micro question. what would you advise for newer game developers? Should they update their Unity version or just stick with the one they started developing with until they finish? Because I'm of the stick to the
Make your
same
game.
one camp.
Make your
Yeah.
game. Just do it. Forget
Make your
about
game,
whatever
yeah.
comes out the pipeline. Make your game.
Mm,
Yeah, I was about to say it's a trick question, because if I say like use the oldest LTS, you're losing support immediately. If you're using something lower than lower LTS, you're literally getting nothing. Generally speaking, there's also a very weird trade-off that you'll only know if you've like been a Unity developer for a long time. But the newer Unity versions are slower. They load slower, they build slower, everything is slower.
Yeah.
They had a blog post about it. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. They want to work to fix it. I have not felt it being fixed as of now, but they are making attempts, and they are making major improvements. Like if you want new features, you want the latest version of Unity. If you want stability and security, use the latest version of Unity. Kinda, it's future stability. It's not current stability.
Yeah, I would add one more thing. If your game has a future, that's your unique selling point, and that's the main feature of your game. Check in which Unity version that feature works. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it can be changed that in some newer version, something that works on the older one won't work that way that you want it to. So find the version that best suits you and stick to it.
So sticking to a version is something I would recommend less. Like you want to be able to update in Terraria, which we were past the 12-year point at this point.
It's just a small indie game, just one of those 5 or 6 people play it.
We cannot update an engine. Our engine is dead. XNA is dead. You cannot even install it properly anymore. The installer would literally fail because it uses some server to download something, and the server is down at this point. So installing XNA is literally more difficult than it used to be these days, because you literally have no support. It only works on it only wants to install on previous versions of Visual Studio, which you cannot get legitimately these days either. Complicated. Case in point, you want to have access to newer features. We cannot say, hey, use Vulkan immediately, because XNA does not have Vulkan. You don't want to get stranded behind. If you want to release on Linux, if Linux wasn't popular back then, you don't have a build pipeline for Linux. How do you actually do that now? New platforms get added to every new Unity version. If new platforms are your target, you want that. You want to be able to support more, because that means more income eventually. At least if you're doing it for the income. There are a lot of things you have to consider, and generally speaking, having access to the most recent tech is going to be to your benefit. Newer versions of C# are, for example, more convenient, have more features, are more efficient. There are amazing time savers in there. Code generation, if it sounds like something that's simple, but it's built into how you make your project, and if your project is too old, it's hard to add it in. So yeah, I would recommend going on the latest, but have a backup plan when you try to check if you can upgrade to latest. So as Paul said, if you have version control, you can upgrade, see if things break, go back if they do. And if you have a rigorous testing process that ensures your most necessary pieces of content do not break, then fine, go ahead at it. If you don't have a rigorous process, you're kind of gambling.
Yeah, my general recommendation is use the latest stable thing up until you're getting ready to release, and then kind of lock in, because if you're right in the last 6 months or so, you generally don't want to upgrade, because then you end up with random things that it might kind of interrupt or delay the release. But I've had that same experience you mentioned with XNA being deprecated and gone. I remember working at Sony, I was stuck for the longest time still using Visual Studio 2003. So I used 2010 for all my tooling and new stuff, and then 2003 for the engine, because upgrading the project, it had been so long and so many things had changed that as soon as you tried to upgrade it, you had, there's hundreds of thousands of errors, and most people, there were very few people on the team that understood, even half of the errors. So getting somebody to be able to fix it all, it ended up eventually getting upgraded, I think, to 2008 or something. But it couldn't make it all the way to 2010, and it was still a long process after everybody had almost left the team, and one guy spent a lot of time doing it. Not an easy thing to do. I highly recommend you just stay up to date if possible, and then lock in when you're getting closer to that release time. So you can keep all the new features and not have to have like some big, oh, I want to upgrade from Unity 5.6 to 2023 or some shit, and you're like, oh, nothing works.
There's also something that's really worth pointing out is that as your team gets to use later versions of an engine, they get to learn to use recent tools, and recent tools are usually better tools, like tools that enable you to do more and better. And you don't want your team to get stuck in the past. In Terraria, we are still using Visual Studio 2010 for the actual game workflow, like edit and continue, etc. We're using like the 2010 version of it. C# version 4, where I think the live one is like 10 already, 11. Yeah. We're not on .NET past core. We're on like .NET framework still. So a lot of like plugins are like incompatible with us. So we have to literally try and downgrade them if we want to use them. Because the DLL loading would like not accept it. There are a lot of things that like make you be stuck in the past. And one thing that we're trying to do is that every tool surrounding Terraria, we're trying to have it be on the most recent versions. For example, if we have a localization changes checker tool, we're literally checking for our source control to see, hey, this localization key changed since the last version of that localization key. Like we're literally loading the localization files, seeing, making a diff, saying, yeah, it changed. So scrap it from literally all the versions and put it down in a document that says this needs to be relocalized. Things like that are on later versions of C#, later versions of .NET. We have access to recent libraries. We're trying to use recent programming practices in order to like work efficiently and be ready for whatever projects come next, because we don't want to be stuck in the past.
Well, I guess that's everybody's opinion on that. You guys want to talk a little bit about clean code before we wrap stuff up?
Yeah, but I do want to bring up the actual features that you get in this LTS. As we said, it has new stuff.
Oh, I forgot. We probably should. I was thinking it was just dots. Is there more?
There's a lot more, it looks like.
There's lots more.
Oh, okay.
So just to clarify, LTS is just a long-term support. Unity recently switched to having like 2 versions a year, and LTS is kind of like 2022.2 with some extras, but mainly it's recapping what you actually get in 2022, because they're going to assume most people using LTS will jump to the next LTS, not to and a streaming version. How do you call it?
Text stream.
The text stream.
Yeah, the text stream, which is going to be subject to more bugs and heavy changes. So when you jump between LTSs, here's what you get access to. So first off, they have their dots being finally production ready, which is a major milestone because it means they're going to start accepting things to fix, and it's not just experimental, and it's not going to be subjected to very heavy changes, hopefully. Because every time that DOTS has changed up to now in the experimental phase, you would have like fundamental changes. Like you wouldn't be able to even like run semblance of the same code anymore. You would have to write your systems differently. You would have to write your components differently, etc., etc. For example, in the transition from 0.51 to 1.0, you now have aspects, and you have the bakers. Instead of like the system finding the components and making them available for you immediately. I may be confusing the exact version. On top of that, they are talking about the netcode for entities, because DOTS is now production ready. You have access to DOTS netcode, which if you want to have very specific solutions with like more technical requirements than netcode for game objects, this is for you. It's also for those who like more control over their networking. In general,
netcode for entities, right?
Yeah. That's netcode or netcode for entities. Yeah.
Just clarify.
Yeah. So just to recap on that, Unity has multiple networking solutions, each one either made by Unity or by an asset author on the Unity Asset Store. have their own approach to how they network stuff, but it's all just sending information to one another. There are games that would want you to send information in a certain way so that they can save on networking costs or have more networking functionality. For example, competitive games would have something where they like rewind time when they get new messages to rewind how the simulation should be for the competitive nature of things. So it's not like host advantage or something or client advantage. And some games would want to be turn-based and very simple, and like because actions are not requiring a lot of that very specific need of like who pressed the button first, you don't need all of that. Netcode for game objects was made with simplicity in mind for small creators. So you have like small indie teams, people who want to make a game that doesn't have like a lot of very strict requirements. It's dedicated server based, but you can switch it to be client authoritative with ease. Like they coded the entire client authoritativeness into it, and then they put a flag that says it's actually not turned on. If you want to enable it, you actually have to understand what you're doing and like make a class that says, hey, actually turn the client authoritativity on. But it's made for small games. It does not have a lot of those features. It's not as efficient as it needs to be for competitive stuff like that. Dot's netcode, on the other hand, has simulative ghosts. It has like multiple simulations, like shallow clones you can spawn to simulate networking for yourself. It has a lot of more advanced features. And naturally, being Dots, you have to understand it better. But yeah. So
yeah, I feel like the entities for or netcode for entities is just kind of more optimized out of the box, just because that's also the way that Dots is. Dots is performance and optimization from the start, so the netcode side of it is as well. But from what I understand on the netcode for game objects, they're still working on a lot of optimizations there too. I remember they were talking about some internal optimizations that they did on just the game objects part to get it close to the performance of the entities. I don't know how close, but it sounded like it got quite a bit faster. And I think that they're probably going to keep pushing that side too to make that fast. But for competitive stuff, I mean, Dots is probably the way to go if you want to build a hyper competitive game like that and you want to have super fast networking or one of the other networking options.
Yeah. So just to clarify, Dots has like the main benefit of Dots that they're pitching to you is this runs way faster than Unity started game objects, and you have more control of it because it's data oriented. But it also means that you have more manual control, which means you need to exert more manual control. You have more responsibility on your hands. But as they released to previous versions of Dots, they learned that there are a lot of things that people do that are very intuitive to people, but actually slow down performance based on current implementations. So between every experimental version, they actually changed Dots a lot for it. So for example, we used to have systems that you can like enable and disable components that you would add and remove for game objects, but not game objects, entities. But every time you add and remove components from entities, they actually change the archetype, and then they have to move to a new buffer, and the copying that has to happen there, it's really slow. So in newer versions, they actually just added an enable flag on components on entities. So once an entity has been added to an archetype, you can just enable and disable that entity being run at the expense of like having a small bit that says, yeah, it's actually skipped that element. So that's like one example. There is a lot more than just Dots in this version, so we should probably get on that.
Yeah, there are quite new fine HDRP features like the volumetric materials. I'm waiting to see how they work because it would enable some fine tuning for the scenes and adding some interesting views. The example that you see there should be new water system. I hope it works this time because the last version I checked had so major memory leaks I couldn't test it even further. And I hope they changed the UX for it because it was very bad. Yeah, the cloud gets then update, but it already works very good. Yeah, but the new version should make it even better to use. For spline package, I'm still waiting to see some stable version that doesn't break in each update. It's for me, this is always the major problem. It's a great tool. I don't really like how the UX is also on this one because it's quite complicated to add to it and to click some stuff, but it has quite new fun features to add. And the Unity lacks the spline system so much that everyone is writing their own. Yeah.
Yeah, there are quite a few. They have quite a few Unity built ones, so it'd be nice once this thing is solid. What kind of bugs did you run into with this thing, by the way?
The bugs are less problematic. The more problematic is thing that when a new version comes out, for example, it breaks how it worked in the older version. Yeah, so that's, for example, there was one version, I think it was 2022.2, I don't remember which version, that made the splines go like they weren't bending, they were just lines from one point to the other one because the version of spline was broken. Yeah, so that's for me the major problem with them. And second one is how the architecture of the spline in code is written, that it makes them quite not fun to extend to your tools. Yeah, but I'm hoping they will fix this one because I have my own spline system, but I have it written this way that I can move to Unity spline in a matter of week in all my tools. But I'm still waiting. Yeah, the forward plus is getting new features. It's moving closer and closer to going with standard level.
And for everybody that doesn't know that, just lets them have lots of lights in forward rendering, right?
Yeah, that's they added the feature. I think there were some problems on Discord sometimes that I showcased how to do it, because most people when they are checking first HDRP, the beginners, and then moving to URP, they don't know, for example, that they have limit for lights at the scene in one place. Yeah, because this is how normal forward works. Yeah, that's why the third is better in this way if you have lots of lights in your scene, but it's not the case in the URP where you mostly shouldn't use the third for now.
What's the default without forward plus? Is it 16? I've lost track.
No, in normal forward it was in URP 4 lights per vertex.
4? I thought you could crank it up to like 8 or 16 for some reason.
You could, but the basic version when you're starting your Unity scene, it was 4 in 2021.3. Maybe I didn't check in 2022.2, but I will check it. But in 2021.3 it was 4 lights. Yeah, so it wasn't too much. Yeah, they finally adding crossfade, which should be just normal feature of each engine.
This is actually one thing that I would like to bring up in a bit more detail. We previously talked about levels of details. So this is the level of detail pop-in that we're talking about. And there is a cost to having LOD crossfade, which is in order to crossfade from A to B, you need to have both A and B loaded. It's something that a lot of people don't understand. They think it's magic that you can actually do that, and it's like all smooth and nice. But it's actually at that point in time, you're actually rendering both objects, and then you're making both of them not render fully. So it's like you're paying costs there. It's going to suck for very specific scenarios. And they're also mentioning temporal anti-aliasing that has been made available, so you can try to reduce these artifacts. That said, I would be very careful if you're making an action game and trying to use temporal anti-aliasing, because it creates very bad light streaks or like bright color streaks as you try to spin the camera, and action games are like notorious for it.
Anti-aliasing is not just making something smooth. It's lots of tech that's behind it. You always should check which version of aliasing is better for your game.
Yeah, and just to point it out, temporal means using time, which means it needs multiple frames, which means it's going to rely on what has been previously rendered. And if that previous render is very different from what you're rendering, it's going to have artifacts because it doesn't know magic. You may be able to clear the temporal buffer, but if you can't, it's going to sometimes create unwanted results. Something to be very attentive to. Decal layers is something that's actually pretty fantastic from what they added. And render layers, it's also something that they added somewhere in here. I don't remember where, but go ahead.
They also added the full screen master node for shader graph.
Yeah,
that should work better.
So just to clarify, previously you were not able to easily make shader graph for post-processing effects, and with this it's going to become way easier to just use the default shader graph to make like an effect that, I don't know, draws anime lines on your game if you're fast or something. It's just
Yeah,
one of those examples that comes.
I'm
up.
waiting for one feature that will be done in Unity finally, when the built-in will be taken down. Because I see so many features added to URP, to HDRP, and nothing to built-in, and so many people start still using built-in.
They did add shader graph for built-in. Also, I just want to
Uh,
point
did
out.
Please don't. I
We had a
had to-
discussion about this
I
last
had,
week. I think.
I had to rewrite all shaders from shader graph to Amplify shader editor because shader graph doesn't work well in built-in. Shader graph doesn't have instancing in built-in. You can't instance objects in the built-in. So VR doesn't work with single pass instancing on built-in. So no, shader graph for me doesn't work with built-in.
Okay.
For
okay,
anything
fair.
more than some basic shaders, you shouldn't use shader graph in built-in. We learned it hard way the last 2 weeks.
It's really tough for asset publishers who are creating, like myself, with the character art, because I have to ship in built-in, because you can easily upgrade
Yeah.
from built-in to HDRP, but you can't. I don't know if there's an easy upgrade from URP to HDRP, if there's a button for that. Maybe there is now, but there wasn't before.
There's not. I had to
there's not.
downgrade to built-in and then upgrade
Yeah,
to
you have to
HDRP.
downgrade to
So-
built-in.
If built-in were to disappear in this new LTS, and suddenly all of a sudden publishers are like, well, shoot, what do we do? You know, it's one of those things I think holds really all of Unity back in some way, at least with a group of people who use the asset store heavily, because you want to sell to as many people as possible. So you ship in built-in because you can sell to everybody. But that encourages a lot of users to continue using built-in because everything just works. There's no random, oh, I installed a package, it's all pink, what do I do? For a lot of new users, that's very daunting, even though it's, you know, we all know what that might mean. But so it's a really tricky situation.
Yeah, but even though I know what that means, I still don't want to deal with it. So I still use built-in in almost every scenario where I get a chance to do so.
Yeah.
There's actually something that I want to bring up that's really interesting. The developers were actually asked on the Dev Blitz day, what is the adoption rate of URP and HDRP? And they actually responded, multiple of them, on the topic. So I haven't read it in precise details, but they have mentioned that 21 LTS has 30% SRPs, which is like it still indicates that the majority of projects are built in, but I don't know if it's shipped projects only, which is something that's concerning me. I do understand that it takes time for projects to be built, and if a project started on URP, etc., it has like way less time to having gun released, so it would not count. So it's fair to count projects in development, but there are so many projects where people just import assets or like just make them, test something, and never use them again. And I don't know if those are counted. And if those are counted, like, do you actually care about the values? Like, is it projects actually being seriously worked on, or is testing projects where the render pipeline doesn't even matter that much, etc.?
I don't know. It says that they're doing active projects that are actively in development.
Yeah, but
I wonder if this is ones where they're like, because I know the Unity teams work with a lot, like hundreds of different game developer companies. They have like the whole department that does it. I wonder if they're using the info from that, from what all those partners that have because you get like the enterprise plan or the direct support stuff. They talk to a lot of those teams, and I think that's where they get a lot of this info, but I'm not completely sure.
It would be nice to qualify what active development means. Like, does that mean, if it's not they're probing their people that they talk to day to day, they're just looking at like whatever data, is it people who opened a project once a week or once a month or once a day? Like how often do you have to open a project for it to be active?
Mm-hmm.
I just assumed that they were real game companies building them that they're looking at and not looking at solo and
those test projects I worked on 2 months ago that I've opened once or twice every so often and looked at, they're still active. They're still active.
I just want to point out this post was started by Jason Booth, and even Crypto289 is there. If you don't know Crypto, he makes really nice visual effect assets on the asset store. And Jason Booth, of course, Microsplat, Megasplat, Beta Elite Shaders. better shaders in general. Really. Yeah. If you want anything about shaders, go check out Jason Booth.
Yeah.
He's
So
completing the triangle of Jasons we have.
yeah. So for your right, I will and for people to see. This is how, when turning instancing on, the VR view looks. The blue cube is done with Amplify. The red cube, which should be over here, is done with shader graph. Yeah, so the shaders to showcase are the same. Yeah, you have just color going to albedo, just color going to albedo. This is code for shader in shader graph when checking it. It has 3089 lines of code for making albedo color.
Seems about right.
Yeah, and lots and lots of passes. This is code from Amplify. And this is code that I would write by hand when doing something like that.
You want to go with the one that has a lot more code, right?
No.
It's more
It's
robust.
obviously doing better stuff.
Line goes up.
Yeah, yeah.
Just to clarify, though, the reason why shaders would have this much code, I just want to clarify it for people. Shaders do a lot, and they have a lot of passes. When you want to render something just as color, that's
Yeah.
fine. That's one pass. But when you want to render shadows, that's actually a separate pass for shadows. And when you want to render in a certain mode, or say deferred, you have to have the pass for that, etc.
Yeah, you have to have it, but the code that's in here in URP and HDRP looks fine. Yeah, but they just made this version for standard that it's not usable for me right now. Yeah.
The only reason I would want this kind of shader is if I'm making assets and I'm using shader graph and I'm not giving the shader graph, I'm giving the actual shader. I would want it to have support for everything, but I'm not even sure if that's the case that's being supported there. I haven't looked into it drastically, with fine detail.
By the way, I'm curious for everybody in chat, are you using built-in URP or HDRP? If anybody's got an opinion, just drop it in chat. I'm really curious to see what everybody that's watching.
Yeah,
actually
I would say, jokes aside too, like I do have some URP projects, like client projects I work on, but I will say that every time I open Unity with an intent to test something, I am not going to activate a render pilot. Like at some point in its, like if I'm going to make some fancy GIFs, I might upgrade from built-in to that. But it's such an ordeal to decide how you want it to look to start out of the box that I honestly will always start in built-in and then eventually migrate probably to URP at some stage.
My take there is that I actually start with URP these days. Single reason being that it starts with shader graph and post-processing packs in. And I like having nice scenes to test in because I mostly do visual stuff these days.
Same as URI. I start with URP for post-processing. I really like to be able to have the ability to play with a nice scene. And for the most part, when I start with built-in, it's often going to become URP. HDRP, I haven't had too many examples of projects to test it with, but there is the temptation, but it's just not been in the kind of things I've been testing or working with.
Yeah, I didn't have the chat up here, but it looks like everybody is saying URP. Yeah, almost everybody.
Yeah, I'm when I'm doing something to check test, I use URP. If I use something higher fidelity HDRP, I'm not going to built-in again. I'm going to built-in when I have to do something for built-in for the customers only, or some support on built-in.
Yeah, I probably should switch to defaulting, but I'm just we've been doing the same thing for so long. Same with like the input systems or whatever.
Yeah.
There is one advantage I'll give you for built-in, which is build times. When you have the URP package in, it's just going to build a bunch of stuff you don't even care about without your consent, which is very frustrating when it happens. So if I care about something that I want to build quickly, run quickly, work with quickly, I would absolutely skip URP, especially if I don't need it to look nice. I usually do that when I'm making quick test projects or minimal test case projects. You don't want packages in minimal test case projects, like you're complicating things for no reason.
Yeah, but for me, the biggest problem is that Unity still doesn't tell us when they want to get the built-in out. Yeah, because for example, if you're building AA game or something like that, you have what timeline? 2-4 years, And then if you want to go with new technology, you don't know if you're started with built-in, what this built-in will be there in next 2 years. We still don't have timeline when the built-in is going away, because they are telling us that it is going away.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of internal fighting over that. My guess is that there are people that want it dead like a year ago and other people that want it to live forever, and it's probably a lot of push and pull there.
Yeah, I would assume.
So before we wrap things up, I wanted to make sure that everybody goes and subscribes to Corvallis' channel. I'm going to link it in chat real quick. And start to get a bunch more subscribers. Go check it out. You want to tell everybody what kind of stuff you've been creating on here?
Sure. It's for the past 2, it's been a postmortem on a game jam I did back in 9 months ago. I need to upload more. And the last 2 have been small devlogs. So the GPT Unity tool, which got delayed because of finals, but it is still in development, I promise. And my review on my virtual production program, Cyberspace Crusade, because that's been one of my longest running projects. That's been taken from built-in to URP and constantly touched up for the purposes of animations and cinematics like this, where I keep trying to add in different elements of motion capture with game mechanics. And then my next big project and big move is, once GPT Unity is complete and it's feature rich with everything that I want, I can use it to start adding in AI actors from services like InWorld or locally hosted AIs, which I've also been playing with. So my channel's more or less a big sandbox of all the new tech I'm experimenting with. And I hope to keep releasing new little educational videos on, I've worked with this technology, here's what it was like to implement. I've also, in the About page, added a website where I can do quicker little blog write-ups. So I think my last one was on a problem I have with the asset store, which delayed me by an entire day. It was for assets you download, and you guys can tell if you've had this, they don't write editor assemblies for their package. So when I went to build, after adding in a couple of assets, my build shattered because they did not have editor assemblies. So I had to go in and manually create editor assemblies for these assets. I'm wondering, this was working just a while ago. Why is it snapped? But yeah, it's a nice mixture of animations, cinematics, and devlogs I like to make. And
just one thing on that point. This is just an overall plea to the Fmod community / team. I love Fmod. I use it a lot, but there's one thing it does which is just so stupid that it drives me insane every time. Inside there, they used to use a event ref keyword that you put on top of a string to mark it as like, this is a labeled string you use for the track. Then they said, oh, we'll make our own type. So they made something called an event reference type. So if you want to pick from a dropdown, whatever song in your game you want, you put an event reference. On the event reference, there is something called path. Good old, just a field called path you can reference. That field called path is asm-deffed out in the editor. So if you write a script to test against the path you typed into the thing, you lose the path and your build breaks. It's just like, it's so dumb. Like I literally write thing.path and it goes, oh, that doesn't exist. No, it does. I'm using it. Oh, it doesn't exist when you build. It only exists in the editor. Oh, thanks for that. It's just,
There is one way you can get around that, but like asset authors would still have difficulties there, which is you can put if Unity editor on every single file in the editor folder, which is stupid in its own right, but it works. Anyway.
Because a friend of mine would kill me if I didn't. I'm working on a project with Antiox from Shadowed Soul Studios. It's about D&D AI creation, where you just get to create a cool little landing page for a character, a quest, and a monster. And hopefully you want to tie them all together so you can give a short prompt and it prints out a nice like DM's guide quest. So you can have like a nice pre-made module easily made, because Dungeons and Dragons does not help dungeon masters for pre-made quest modules. It is rough. So that's something we're working on, and he wanted me to share the link real quick.
Can you screen share it too?
Sure. Actually, do I have access to it? Because I had a dev build that I shattered last night, so I'm not sure if my access still looks pretty. Let me look it up really quick. Make a quest is what it's called. And the link is okay, he's sending it to me because I know he's also watching stream.
Awesome.
There we go. I found it. Wait, I need to make sure this is the dev one so it doesn't shatter. Okay, yeah, this one's good. Here you go. I'm just very slow at typing. There we go. Should I post it in private?
Either one. Yeah, drop it in both.
Here's it in private. I don't have the stream open, so let me crack that.
Yeah, I'll drop it into the public chat right now.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just trying to work on kind of as much as I can throughout the 3 months I'm off. So going hard on my projects, working more with Cyberspace Crusade, and hopefully adding in things like that in-world integration. Because Russell, who I met at the Game Dev Guild, was so cool. I really want to use his technologies and see more about that AI NPC concept and really flesh it out.
Oh yeah, I think that stuff's gonna be super interesting. I want to play with that a lot more. Maybe next week. I think I'm actually gonna have a little tiny bit of spare time. If I don't play games instead, I might dive into that.
You might be too stuck using your time in Tears of the Kingdom, I'm seeing.
It gets difficult. It's like this balancing act. Like I want to play some games. I want to watch new stuff, learn new things, and code and create things, and also have kids. To raise an army of them. So it gets time consuming. Before we go though, there are a couple things going on we should probably mention. Like, Pal, you got an awesome sale on your lava thing that's coming up, right? Isn't there a flash deal about to pop up?
Yeah, it's going. The flash deal is coming in 2 days. So yeah.
And that's on. Let me click the right one. This lava right here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so if you want some lava tools with materials, shaders, graphics, you can take this one on the flash deal. It's 70% off, so it's quite good catch.
Yeah, definitely worth grabbing. Get it while it's 70% off. And Andrew, you got 2 packs on sale, if I remember right.
2
the
now,
fantasy,
yeah.
the 13 characters and the low poly characters as well.
Yep, that was on flash deal earlier this week, and so now it's 50% off for all you who missed it. 70% off. So
yeah, I started writing up an email to share it with everybody too, and then I got distracted and forgot to send it. I felt terrible. Like I was like, oh, I saw your email, and I was like, oh, I got to send one of those out and let everybody know. And then I started writing it up, got it ready like 9 a.m. And then I don't know what happened. I got distracted with the kid, and I completely forgot. I got back, and I was like, oh, it's not on sale anymore.
Yeah. It's all good. It's still a good deal at 50% off. I mean, I think 50% off anything's a good deal.
Oh, yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of getting sales. I've been buying like a ridiculous number of assets during this spring sale because I want to make this. I've got this game in my head that I've been slowly trying to work out, and I'm like, oh, that'll fit, and I keep grabbing things. Like some of them, it's just to see like, does this make sense? Would this actually fit? Would I want to do something like this? And some of it's just like, oh, these are like obvious no-brainer things I'm going to add into here. And one of the things I'm working with a lot is RPG Builder now. I'm spend a good amount of time with that. I played with it before I used it a little bit, but I want to actually see if I can just build out a full game, or at least the core of the game, without having to write a lot of the core systems that I've already written enough times that I don't find it very interesting. So
you reminded me something, Andrew, right now. As people should know, your packs have a lot of blend shapes, and they're pretty amazing. You can customize a character in a lot of ways, and I'm a huge fan of that. There was one post on the Dev Blitz for graphics that actually asked what is the cost of having a blend shape on the character. And they talked about the memory cost of like every vertex that's getting modified by the blend shape. It was a very interesting talk. I recommend people go and read it. It should be easy if you look up blend shapes as the search term. It's not a big thing, but it's like something very interesting to see the developer response now. Basically, they're going to see if there's maybe a future to optimize it so it's easier to load it in, because every single vertex would take like 40 bytes. It's not a lot if you think about the fact that every vertex has like the free positions, the offsets, the modified normals, not normals, tangents. That's what I'm thinking about. Etc. So every piece of that information is like it's stacking up to become about 40. I don't think there's a lot they can do to optimize it, but it's very interesting to read about.
It's one of those things where people ask me how, like, oh, with all those blend shapes, and I basically say it's not that big of a deal. Like, unless you're going to change hundreds of them at once, which you might do in some cases, you won't see any real issues with performance. And once it's loaded, it doesn't take any additional resources, as far as I understand it. So unless you're changing it constantly, which for my blend shapes, their customization of the character, generally speaking, you're going to change it at a time, and then it's going to stay the same for most of the time.
Just to clarify to people, so blend shape is like a layer on top of the mesh of the character that says blend to this kind of look of the character to be changing over time. It's similar to animation, but it's done on a per vertex level. So if you have a character, a human, as I mentioned earlier in Unity, has 32 bones, like either finger on your hand, the upper arm, the lower arm, etc. Those are 32 bones. You can animate those, or you can animate every single vertex that builds up the hand, and then you can do a lot more intricate effects. But every single blend shape is basically like every vertex that's changing, it takes memory because it's essentially another vertex in the creation, which is not a lot, but it does mean like for runtime you're actually loading a very small model base, but if it has 200 blade shapes, it does mean that you're loading that model 200 times, at least for the parts that move. It's not a big deal. It's memory. Memory is like the easiest thing to manage in terms of like resources on the computer, and the actual sampling and blending of blend shapes only happens as they change, as far as I know, so it has no real performance cost, but it's something to think about, which I found interesting.
You're scaring some of the people, but yes, it's not that big of a deal. But I will say we just started work, and I hesitate to talk about this because I promises. We just started work on a new human system that would replace this one. Now, if you buy this pack, you'll probably be able to upgrade for free, or for very, very, very cheap. Probably for free. So there you go. No risk there. But the new system will have a lot less blend shapes on the human, because we went a little bit too crazy, I think, on the human. And I think there's like 160 shapes of all tiny little muscles and stuff that really in a game you can't even see. And then you put clothes on the character and they cover up the body part anyways. So we're going to simplify that.
Wait, you're telling me I won't be able to control my earlobe size anymore? Disgusting.
Maybe earlobe size will still be there. Maybe the earlobe size, and definitely ears.
I need my deltoid flexes like every time I do any kind of arm movement.
I know there's little back dimples and lower back. That's a thing.
You know, it's all really nice details until you put on the first helmet that you find 3 minutes into the 8-hour game.
Yeah. Yeah. So a new system that will be basically one human male, one human female, that and would have been one human, but it's too difficult to blend between the two, that have blend shapes for sizing and muscles. So there's one system that works for any humanoid with modular heads, modular hands, modular feet, body parts cut up so that we can reduce clipping with clothes even more than we already do. And that means we can more easily share armor between, say, a goblin and a human, and a troll and a other random humanoid character like a skeleton. And so it should be very exciting. So we're starting work on that, simplify the blend shapes, but it'll probably be months before we have anything to show for that.
So it's definitely an awesome pack. So go grab it if you don't already have it.
And there's dragons too.
Perfect for RPG building if you decide to play a human or a goblin or etc.
Yeah. It's funny. I wanted to mention one last thing. One of the things I want to do when I make this game that I've been talking about making is I probably won't do it, but one of the ridiculous ideas I had was having them do a character creator, having them play, like get their character already, and then start playing, and in the first like 30 seconds or so their character's dead and they switch to a totally different character.
You can have them come back as the antagonist. You just build.
No, I'm gonna have their brain
No,
get
that-
extracted and shoved into the robot model that I have that has a brain in it. They can customize their
I was gonna
character
say
and then
it has to
die.
be really. It has to be really like frustrating for the player. Like your character actually dies in an explosion. It's like, oh, we tried to recreate your face, but we couldn't, so we just randomized a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I want to have them get abducted by aliens and move their brain into a robot right after they create their character.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put some pictures of their created character in their new bedroom. Right, they see what they used to look like before they were a robot. Something like that. But I think it'll be fun. It might just irritate and make them mad, but it'll make me laugh.
It
So
would be funny though.
that's enough. Cool. Well, I think we're just about out of time. I don't know if we had any other links. I've shared the story Discord, but hopefully everybody goes to join it. For some reason, my messages in chat are not going through, so I'm having to copy and paste them over to the other side. But if you haven't joined Jason Story's Ko-fi channel or his Discord server, go sign up right now. You just go donate $1 to get the access. It's more than worth it, and it's just keep spam bots out and stuff. And it's an awesome place for just general discussion. Highly recommend it. And of course, go subscribe to Corvallis. I've linked it a couple times. I'm going to link the channel one more time.
Well, thank you.
As soon as
I've got I do have one last link because someone also just DM'd me about a different thing I'm working on. They say, "Hey, did you mention it? The AI game jam in question."
Oh yes. Do we have a link for that?
Yes, we do.
Let's drop that in chat as well. If you want to sign up for that AI game jam, when is the date for it?
Ours is starting July 14th because GMTK is the 7th. And if you want to join that, we'd like to give you a bit of a break because burnout is a very real thing. So by all means, posted it in the private.
All right, so I'll drop that link in the chat as well. And if you want to check out the GMTK Game Maker's Toolkit, if you haven't, I assume you're already all subscribed to the channel, so I didn't really talk too much about it. But if you haven't subscribed, go check it out. It's just awesome videos on game development. They're really well put together. 1,000 times better at video creation than I am. So I highly recommend this channel. Go check it out. And then there's the Game Jam as well. So go join that and make some AI stuff. I might actually join that one. Do some AI. An AI game jam sounds kind of fun.
There's a lot of interesting things, just the implementation makes you think about so much once you actually try to make a game and ship it with AI.
Yeah, it's got me kind of I don't know, the whole AI I don't know, I'll start a whole extra discussion if I start diving into stuff. Anyway, I want to say thanks to everybody for coming out here. Please like, subscribe, share, drop a comment if you got questions, thoughts, things you want us to talk about. Next week we'll talk about the clean code stuff. I want to dive into this discussion that I was watching on Primogen and talking about clean code, Martin Fowler, and method lengths, and a couple other things. I think maybe we'll talk about and share a couple videos, maybe even like pop up a couple videos and we'll play them and just kind of react and talk about them next week as a live thing. And then if your eye is available, we will talk about the Shader Bible book too. If not, then we'll wait until the week after or whenever we can, as soon as we can. I want to dive into it because I think it's interesting. I'd also like to read through one or two more chapters too, though. So I think that might make it a little bit better. And your eye shared that Johnny Turbo has released another video that I'm going to drop in chat as well. What was that one on?
I haven't gotten a chance to see it at all. I just saw that.
It looks like pathfinding for ECS.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, looks like a cool video. I like the. And you got a haircut, huh? Cool. Well, yeah. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Anybody got any last words?
One more thing. Please, everybody, watch over your health. Sit down properly when you're walking. Don't slouch. Sit upright. I have been dealing with some sciatica pains, and I don't wish that on anybody. That is all.
Oh, yeah.
Take breaks, stretch out, don't get RSI, which after finals I have a little bit of. Can't move as fast, so move within good pace, okay? Don't blow out your tendons.
So you got to go to a
Take care of
standing
your body.
desk.
For more health tips, be careful who you kiss. Perfect timing, Jason.
That's perfect, right? So the way you want to do it is you get a standing desk and you put a tripod behind it. You get a nice view of the back of the monitor. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for coming out and joining us. I guess we will be back next week. And I don't think I've got anything else to say as I come back slowly into frame. So I'll play the outro and we'll see you on Friday. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you for having me.
Bye,